Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Ichigo was only man in Soul Society and married all? Before I start, please do support for more awesome content and subscribe my channel and like this video. Go support and follow the StringDman for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story, link in the description. Let's start this video. It was another day for the 15-year-old high school teen. Another day of getting to school, finishing his work, hanging out with friends, and then helping a spirit find peace. Some punks were messing with a vase that had flowers in it that Ichigo left for a little girl's spirit, so he taught them a lesson. For as long as he could remember, Ichigo has always been able to see spirits and ghosts. It was something that he could recall all the way back to when his mother died when he was 9 years old and he couldn't do anything about it. He remembered that night all too well. The falling rain splashing his face and mixing with the tears and blood covering the ground. The girl who looked like she was about to jump into the river to end her life. The rush of air that went through his hair as he tried to save her and felt nothing but air going through his fingers. Those red eyes that appeared for a split second, and finally his mother, lifeless. After he lost her, he made a vow to protect anyone in need, no matter whatever happened to himself in the process. Ichigo walked along for a few more minutes before heading into his home, which also doubled as a clinic ran by his father. The same father who just so happens to attack his son all too often, like right now. "I'm home." Ichigo started right before he was kicked in the face by his dad. Ichigo fell to the floor head first and groaned. "Ow. Damn it. Two things, Ichigo." Isin started as he stood over his only son. 1. You dropped your guard like a rank armature. And 2. You're late for dinner. "Oh come on." Ichigo yelled back as he stood up and got in Isin's face. "I help make a spirit find peace, and this is how I'm greeted, and what do you mean I dropped my guard, you crazy old man? I live here so I shouldn't have my guard up." "Oh, so it's the ghost's fault, eh?" Isin yelled back as the two started to fight each other in a comical way. "Hey, come on you two." Yuzu started in a worried tone as she sat down at the table with a plate in her hand. "Can't you two just sit down so we can have a dinner?" "Let 'em fight, Yuzu," Karen said in her usual nonchalant tone. "More they fight, more food for me." Yuzu was still very unsure why only she and their dad couldn't see ghost, and why Karen and Ichigo never thought much about it. The simple fact that they could commune with the dead always intrigued the blonde. As Yuzu was thinking to herself, Ichigo had punched their dad into a wall and stormed off to his room, stating that he'll eat later. Ichigo opened his door and went in, closing it with a slam. He flung his bag on his desk and laid down on the bed. Ichigo spread himself out and paced his arms behind his head before shutting his eyes and drifting to sleep. In his dreams he could hear a faint cry from a woman. It wasn't like a regular cry, it was more of a light sob than a cry. Ichigo saw her and saw that she was kneeling next to a body of some sorts. He walked over to the shadowy figure and looked over her shoulder to see a dead body of a woman he didn't know with long black hair. She had a peaceful yet stern look to her face, even while she was dead. Ichigo didn't know what was going on and looked over to the shadowy figure, only to see that she was gone. "What the hell?" Ichigo whispered to himself as he looked around. After a few seconds of nothing, he looked back to the body of the woman and now noticed that another lay beside her. The face of this girl was covered by what looked like a towel of some sorts. She was interlocked hand in hand with a woman with black hair, and the look on that woman's face changed from stern to happy. She opened her eyes, and Ichigo could see the pale blue orbs on her face. She looked over to him and smiled weakly before whispering something Ichigo couldn't hear. Before Ichigo could even voice his own thoughts, a rumble happened that made both women vanish like water. Ichigo looked around and could still feel the intense rumbling grow and grow until he felt a sharp pain in his head. He clenched said area and could feel an intense pulse growing furiously in his own mind. The pain that followed was unbearable for the teen as he fell to his knees. "Weak." A distorted voice called out from the distance. Ichigo barely registered it but looked up to see a blur of someone wearing all white and far away. The figure could tell that he saw it and smiled at him. "Weak," it said again, this time the voice was distinctly a female's. Before Ichigo could say anything, he opened his eyes and was back in his own room. He breathed heavily and was sweating at what he saw in his recurring nightmare. This dream had been happening to him ever since his mother died 6 years ago. Ichigo still had no idea what it meant, but it always ended with that woman calling him weak every time. This time it was different though. This was the first time that he had felt any pain before. What was that supposed to mean? "Damn it," Ichigo said to himself as he laid there lost in thought. "Who are these people?" he said to himself in his thoughts. Suddenly and without warning, a black butterfly flew into his room through the closed window. Ichigo was confused as to what he had just seen until a girl in a black outfit suddenly came out of his wall through some kind of portal of sorts. Ichigo immediately went on the defensive when she grabbed at her sword. "Whoa. Who the hell are you?" he yelled out. "It's here," she said to herself in an ominous tone. Throwing a tick mark on his head, Ichigo kicked the girl in her rear while shouting. "Hey, I'm talking to you." The girl landed on her face, was immediately confused at what had just happened. She could have sworn that there was no way a human could see her, let alone a male. "If you're a burglar then you're not a very good one," Ichigo yelled at her. "Why, you can see me?" The girl started as she turned her head toward the boy. She got a very good look at him and stood up quickly, seeing his eyes following her movements. "That's not possible." "What? The whole me knocking you on your ass thing, or the whole seeing you thing?" Ichigo asked her in an almost insulting tone. He did not sound like he was in the mood for any sort of shenanigans tonight. The girl stared at him with wide eyes and just had to ask this boy. "Hey, are you really a boy?" Ichigo was even more irritated now. Not only has this random girl just showed up out of nowhere, but now she was questioning his gender for some weird reason. Ichigo took a breath to calm himself down and decided to just answer her question without losing his composure. "Yeah, I am." He answered her while crossing his arms around his chest. "Why is that important? And who even are you to begin with?" The girl was in absolute shock now. In the entirety of the spirit world, has there ever been a male who could see spirits? Only females could, at the very least, sense a spirit or hollow in the world of the living. How could this boy be able to not only see her, but also touch her as well? She slowly inched her way over to him and quickly tapped his shoulder, much to his discomfort. When he could feel that he was indeed not a spirit or some figment of her imagination, she looked at him even. "Okay, I've had enough of this." Ichigo started as he placed his hand on her head. The touch was making the girl blush madly, something that she's never done before. "I don't know who you think you are, but this is starting to get on my nerves. So I'm gonna have to tell you to get the hell out of my house, midget." The insult registered shortly after and the girl now had a tick mark on her head. "Midget, huh?" she said as she moved her arms and started saying something. "Bakudo number 1. Sigh." Before Ichigo could question her, his arms were suddenly tied behind him and he was forced down to the ground. He struggled as hard as he could but to no avail. "Now then." The girl started as she took a seat and brought out a marker and pad. "I guess since you can see me, I might as well explain what I am and what I do to you." She started to draw on her pad with a marker and showed Ichigo a bad illustration of bunnies. "Now then. I'm a soul reaper and my job is to keep balance within the world of the living. These souls here are called plus souls, or good spirits of people that have died and haven't moved on because of some kind of grief of some kind. These are hollows, or bad spirits. They consume souls to survive and imbalances the spiritual world in doing so. These beings used to be plus souls, but were changed into hollows when their soul chain was completely consumed. My job is to destroy the hollows and to send the pluses to the soul society, a peaceful afterlife where all souls go to when cleansed." Ichigo listened to her explanation and understood it slightly, but her illustrations weren't making it easy. "You know," he started, getting her attention. "Your drawing really do suck." Her response to this was to draw on his face. After a little arguing from him, Ichigo calmed down a little to hear the rest of her explanation. He noticed that she was constantly looking away from his gaze and kept blushing. Not fully understanding this, Ichigo decided to just ask the obvious question. "Hey Soul Reaper, why do you keep blushing when you look at me?" Ichigo said to her, catching her by surprise. "Well." She hesitated as she turned her gaze away from him for a quick second. She took a deep breath before turning back and answering. "The Soul Society is comprised of all females. No males live there and none should be able to see us." "Wait a second." Ichigo started. "If there aren't any men there, then how are there so many of you and what happens to a male soul?" "We reproduce in a natural way that doesn't require men. The male souls are the reason for that," the girl said, confusing Ichigo. "When a male soul is sent into the spiritual world, their bodies change to that of a female's, but they can impregnate another female within that world. I've seen it before and it's pretty strange to say the least." Ichigo didn't fully understand what she meant by this, but something told him that it had to be true if there really were so many souls in the Soul Society place she was talking about. She was about to continue talking until a crash and a scream could be heard from downstairs. "What the hell?" Ichigo yelled out as he tried to stand up. Ichigo." Yuzu's weak voice could be heard from outside the doorway and it caught both Ichigo's and the Soul Reaper's attention. "Save Karen." "Yuzu." Ichigo yelled out as he saw his sister pass out on the ground. "There must be a hollow down there," the girl said as she ran out of the room, leaving Ichigo there. She made it down and saw that the room was a wreck with a massive hole in the side of the wall. A hollow stood there with a girl with dark hair in its hand. "Damn," she said as she drew her sword. Before she could do anything, Ichigo came crashing down the stairs, much to her amazement, and saw his sister in the hand of what he could only assume was a hollow. "Karen." Ichigo stood up and started to struggle against the bindings. "Stop it," the girls yelled at him. "If you struggle too much, your soul will." She couldn't finish her sentence when Ichigo suddenly and without warning broke through the binding spell with pure strength. She was surprised beyond all reason and even more so when he ran out with a chair and went to attack the hollow. The hollow punched Ichigo away and he skidded away, but he stood up and stood his ground. "So, you're the one with the delicious smell," the hollow said in a feminine voice. "I will enjoy eating you, boy. A very attractive and tasty boy at that." Before the hollow could do anything, the girl appeared above her and slashed her arm that had Karen in it. There was a screech as the hollow dropped Karen and Ichigo slid over to catch her. He ran back inside and set Karen down on the couch that was still standing normally. He was going to stay by her side, but that voice from his dream suddenly came into his mind just like in his nightmare. "Are you still weak, Ichigo?" she said to him. This was the first time she had ever said more than that one word to him. "Who are you?" Ichigo said as he heard the Soul Reaper outside scream in pain. He looked over and saw that the hollow had taken a bite out of the girl. "Are you still weak, Ichigo?" The voice in his head continued on. "I'm not weak," Ichigo said as he continued to watch as the Soul Reaper fell to her knees. "Then prove it," the voice said with a snicker. "Show me what you can really do and prove to me that you're not weak." Ichigo suddenly felt a sudden surge of some sort of energy come over him. He ran outside and saw that the hollow was coming over to the Soul Reaper. She was slumped over on the wall and waiting for the hollow to finish her off. That was when Ichigo suddenly came over and, with his clenched right fist, punched the hollow directly in the face. This surprised not only the girl, but also the hollow which was flying away right about now. Ichigo stood there for a moment and looked at his right hand as it changed from a pale white color with black fingernails back to his regular hand. "I don't know what you just did, boy," the girl started as she struggled to lift her sword off the ground. "But you're not strong enough to kill the hollow. Take my sword and ram it through your heart." "What?" Ichigo asked her. "What would that accomplish, Soul Reaper?" "My name is Rukia Kachiki," Rukia started. "And this will give you a portion of my Soul Reaper powers to protect your family." Ichigo realized this and smirked at her. "Then I guess I'll take over from here, Rukia," Ichigo said to her, causing her to blush madly. "My name is Ichigo Kurosaki." The hollow charged at them to stop whatever they were planning, but was too late. In a massive bright flash of light, the boy started to change. Almost instantly, the hollow's arm was now on the ground. Ichigo stood there wielding a massive blade on his shoulder. Rukia sat there in a white kimono in complete and utter shock at what she was seeing. "No way," she said to herself. "I only planned to give him a portion of my energy, but he took all of it. And he's still a male. How? Just what is he?" Her thoughts were broken when she saw him lift up his blade. "I've never seen anyone wield his Zanpakuto that massive before. You tried to hurt my family," Ichigo said to the now terrified hollow. "And for that, you're dead." He rushed over to it and before the hollow could even react, Ichigo cut it in half with his blade with ease. The hollow slowly disappeared from existence in the world of the living and Ichigo was left standing there, looking at himself and his blade. "Whoa," he said to himself as he saw something in the sword that looked oddly familiar. "Urahara's shop." The blonde woman in a green and white bucket hat was sitting outside on the front porch of a candy shop. She looked out into the distance as she felt an intense and powerful spirit energy she had never felt before and slightly shuddered. It was strange for her. She had felt many powerful spirit energies before now and felt completely fine, but this energy was different. It was intimidating to her and yet very securing at the same time. "Boss." A tall and muscular woman with shades on said from behind the blonde. "I felt it too, Tessai," the blonde said to her as she stood up. "It's coming from Misaki's old home." She tipped her hat back as she could see faint traces of the energy flying all around. "Whoever is the reason for this, I have a bad yet interested feeling about this." Ichigo woke up in his bed as the sunlight hit his face. He just had a pretty good night's rest for the most part and he stretched himself out. He was very relaxed until he remembered last night. Ichigo quickly got out of bed and ran downstairs only to see his family standing in the living room staring at the huge hole in the wall. "I can't believe a truck actually hit our house last night and none of us noticed it," Yuzu said to Karen who was a little skeptical about this whole thing. "I don't know, Yuzu. I just find it hard to believe that a truck hit our house and didn't even mess up most of the inside," Karen said to her twin sister. "Oh, Misaki." Isin started in his usual goofy way. He ran over to the poster of his dead wife and planted himself on it. "I wasn't here to protect our precious children and they could have been hurt." He started crying fake tears until he saw Ichigo standing on the stairs looking at the hole. He became a little serious when he saw Ichigo. "A truck hit the house last night," he said to get his attention. "Police say it was possibly a drunk driver who didn't have much sense to stay here and at least wake someone up." Ichigo looked over to his father and was confused beyond belief at what he was hearing. Did last night really happen to him? If none of it was real, then how come he could remember talking to that woman from his dream? It had to be real, right? Ichigo kept thinking to himself as he walked on to school. It was bothering him far too much to just accept that that was all in his head somehow. Something like that can't be imagined. Ichigo went into his classroom and passed by his friends to his seat. Kigo had tried to surprise Ichigo, but merely caught a clothesline for his troubles. Ichigo walked past Orihime and waved to her when she waved at him. He saw Chad standing next to her, and she had her usual look on her face as Ichigo passed her. Ichigo waved to her and Totsuki before sitting in his chair next to the window. He looked outside and started to think about last night hard. Unbeknownst to Ichigo though, a girl he never paid any attention to suddenly started to stare at him for no reason at all. She was wearing glasses and had short dark blue hair. She looked as if she had seen something truly impossible as she stared at Ichigo. Ichigo looked away from the window and noticed her staring at him, but she blushed and quickly turned away. Now Ichigo knew that what happened last night wasn't just his imagination. He had gotten that same reaction from. Yo Ichigo. Kigo interrupted Ichigo's thoughts. What's up Kigo? Ichigo asked his friend in a somewhat irritated tone. We have a new student dude, and she's kind of a cutie if you ask me. Kigo whispered that last part to him and moved out of the way. When Ichigo saw the girl, he immediately jumped out of his seat and pointed at her while stammering. The girl in question was the same girl from last night. She stood there in a school uniform and did a little curtsy before introducing herself. Hello there. I'm Rukia Kichiki, your new classmate. She held her hand out to Ichigo for him to shake it. Before Ichigo could do so, he saw that her hand had writing on it. Say anything and you're dead. Ichigo felt very uncomfortable now and slowly shook her hand. Nice to meet you, again. He said, catching Kigo's attention. Again? He asked. You met her before Ichigo? Actually yes he has. Rukia said quickly. It was yesterday while he was passing by me on the street. Kigo shrugged and walked off as the teacher came into the room. Before Ichigo could turn around, Rukia had grabbed him by the back collar of his shirt and taken him out of the room. He protested for a bit before Rukia had taken him outside and stood in front of him. What the hell was that all about? He asked her in a clearly angered tone. First of all, shut up. Rukia said to him as she reached into her skirt pocket. Second, there's a hollow nearby and you need to take care of her, Arid. Ichigo didn't understand what the hell she meant by that. What are you talking about Rukia? I thought you were a soul reaper and taking out hollows was your job. Well it's very impossible to do that when you have all of my powers Ichigo. She started to put on a red glove with a white skull in the center of blue flames. Now hold still. I really don't want to screw this up. She said that last part under her breath. Ichigo was about to say something until she rushed over and shoved the glove in his face. Ichigo fell back from her force and stood up angry only to realize something off. He was standing in front of Rukia and his body. What the hell? He shouted as he pointed at his body in horror as it laid on the ground. What did you do to me? Relax. All I did was take your soul out of your body. Rukia explained as she started to move his body out of eyesight from anyone who might see him. You can get back inside it after we're done. Now let's go. Rukia started to walk away and Ichigo had no choice but to follow her. They ran off over to a park where they saw a little boy running away from a spider-like hollow. Ichigo wasted no time in preparing to go out there and stop the hollow until Rukia stopped him. Where do you think you're going? She asked in a cold tone. Ichigo turned to her and saw the stern look on her face. I'm gonna go and save that kid. That's why you brought me here for, right? So you're just going to go in head first into an enemy you previously knew nothing about before last night. Rukia continued in a harsh tone. And take up the mantle of a soul reaper. Bearing all the responsibilities of defending the human world from these monsters. That isn't something you merely do once then forget. It is a commitment. A job that never ends and will always be your top priority no matter what. Are you strong enough to accept those responsibilities, Ichigo Kurosaki? The boy stumbled and fell to the ground. He was too frightened to get up and far too terrified to look at the hollow chasing him. Before the hollow could sink its teeth into the boy, Ichigo made a declaration by stabbing the hollow through its mask with his sword. Here's my answer to you Rukia. Ichigo said as he pulled out of the hollow and watched it fade away. One thing that will never change about me is protecting people, no matter who or what they are. He turned to her with an equally as stern face that caused Rukia to blush slightly at him. If protecting these spirits from these hollows is something I have to do, then so be it. He walked over to the boy who was still on the ground and looking up at Ichigo in amazement. Ichigo kneeled down to him and placed the bottom of his hilt on the boy's forehead. The boy suddenly felt a peaceful rush hit him as his clothes faded away and his body started to change on him. Ichigo stood up and backed away to watch this. It would no doubt be the first of many times he would see this and know just what Rukia was talking about. The boy's body started to change within the light as he was transformed into a girl with his similar features. Ichigo looked on at how the girl looked and noticed that she was indeed a girl. She floated away and disappeared into the sky to what Ichigo could only assume was the Soul Society. Whoa. He said to himself. Impressive, isn't it? Rukia asked him. He looked over to her and saw her smirking to him. That's what happens to males. Now come on, we'll miss school if stay here. Ichigo nodded and followed her back to school where he went back into his body. They went to class and sat in their respective seats apart from each other, and all Ichigo could think about was how many souls are still out there and how he can help them. Urahara's shop. There it is again. The blonde said as she was behind the counter of her store. She looked outside and could tell that the two children cleaning the place up also felt it. Ururu, Jinta, come finish cleaning up there then head inside, okay. The blonde said from behind the counter. This energy has been making her worried since last night, but she made sure that the two outside couldn't hear it in her voice. Got it? A girl with short red hair, a white shirt and blue shorts, said as she went over to the other girl. Come on Ururu, let's hurry up so we don't have to feel that ridiculous energy again. Ururu nodded timidly and swept a little faster. She knew exactly what would happen if she felt that energy a second time. When the two finished, it was well past noon. They finished and ran inside to get to the training grounds, so they didn't have to feel that energy for the rest of the night. The blonde could breathe a little easier now, knowing that those two would be alright now. Her reprieve was interrupted when she saw her newest customer, Rukia Kichiki, walk into her shop. She used her fan to hide her concerned look as Rukia walked in. "Aw, my newest customer." The blonde said once she regained her composure. "To what do I owe this illustrious visit?" "I need something to help a certain individual become detached from their soul for a short while, Urahara," Rukia said to her. She was obviously a little bit frustrated for some reason. Urahara hadn't asked who exactly has her powers at all for the simple fact that whoever it had to be someone truly dangerous to have her on edge like this. Urahara decided to chance it though. Not knowing was a lot more of a risk than actually knowing for a fact, and she needed to know. "Before I decide to hand you anything, Ms. Kichiki." She stood up and had a visibly serious face that made Rukia tense up a bit. "I need to know who exactly has your powers. Who is she?" Rukia could tell that this was going to frustrate the shopkeeper to no extent and decided it'd be best to tell her rather than have her in the dark. With a heavy sigh and a little bit of nervousness in her body movement that Urahara noticed, Rukia answered her. "Ichigo," Rukia said to her. "His name is Ichigo Kurosaki." Urahara was visibly stunned by two revelations at this point. The first being that the name of this person was Kurosaki, as in her old friend that died Kurosaki. The second was the fact that Rukia didn't say her name, she said his name. That meant that. "You mean to tell me that a boy has all of your powers?" Urahara yelled out uncharacteristically. Rukia jumped a bit from hearing the usually cool and calm shopkeeper raising her voice for the first time. Despite only knowing her for a short time, Rukia was a good judge of character and could tell from Urahara's body language and conversation methods that she was a very calm yet very intelligent person. To see her this way though, something about Ichigo being a male must be true shock to her. "Yes he does," Rukia said after regaining herself. "I'm currently staying in his closet until my own powers come back to me." Urahara went from shocked to interested. The boy's power had been leaking all over the place since last night, and there was no way that others that are spiritually aware would quickly sense and find him. That just means that she has to get to him first and test just how strong he really is. Not wanting to waste any time, Urahara gave Rukia a Pez dispenser and told her to go on back to the boy. Rukia agreed and left quickly before she saw a strange black cat drop down from the roof. The black cat went inside and saw Urahara's strange look. Urahara sighed before she noticed the cat. "Biruchi?" Urahara said in surprise as she went towards the cat. She picked him up and asked. "You're here at a strange time, girl. What brings you back to my humble abode?" Biruchi sighed before wiggling free of her grip and hoping on her right shoulder. "I felt an incredible amount of spirit energy all the way back here from where I was. Literally more than 20 miles away too. What's going on here, Kisuke?" the cat asked in a masculine voice. Kisuke didn't know how to answer her best friend's question other than just saying it. "That girl you saw leave, she had to give up her powers to someone so they can save their family from a hollow," Kisuke said to the cat, causing her to raise an eyebrow. "So the girl she gave her powers to must have an intense spiritual awareness to be able to draw out that much spirit energy that even I was getting nearly crushed in my normal form from 20 miles away?" Yuruchi asked her. "Yeah, pretty much, but only one thing is wrong with that statement, Yuruchi," Kisuke started, causing the cat to raise an eyebrow. "This surprised me very badly, but the one Rukia gave her powers to was a boy named Ichigo Kurosaki." Yuruchi was shocked by what she just heard. So much so that she fell off Kisuke's shoulder and changed to her regular form. She sat there completely and stared up at her friend with a mixture of confusion, curiosity, and what Kisu could only assume was a bit of doubt. What does he look like? Is he ripped? Has that Rukia girl had her way with him yet, or is he the more dominant type? She kept asking questions and kept getting more and more sensual with every one of them. Now, easy there you kitty in heat. Kisuke said as she waved her arms in front of Yaruchi. I haven't met him yet, but I am very interested in seeing just what he can do, and I'm very interested in just how he handles the Soul Society. Ichigo's house, a few days later. Ichigo had finally gotten home after some distractions from Hollows and laid in his bed. This whole thing was a lot more frustrating than he thought it would be. A Hollow would appear every once in a while, and Rukia would get him to go after it. It was repetitive to keep him killing weak Hollows, but it was simple enough for him to learn how to control his own power. Especially when he would unintentionally release a large amount of his energy without knowing. He had gotten better at it, but something just didn't feel right to him. Ever since he got this power he hasn't had that dream anymore, and that woman who kept calling him weak wasn't there anymore. Maybe he had finally shut her up, or maybe there was another reason that he just didn't know about. The next day went by as usual for the orange-haired teen. At least until he went into his classroom and saw a message on his desk. Meet me here after school. Be prepared to fight. The note had an address that Ichigo knew of and knew that this was going to be a ridiculous handful. He looked around to all the girls in the room to see which could be a possible enemy that wants him dead. He knew that it couldn't be Orihime or Chad, those two couldn't harm him even if they wanted to. Totsuki is his best friend, so there's no way she would want him dead. Hizuru doesn't seem likely to either. So all that left was the only other girl in the room that wasn't Rukia. That Uriwashita girl. So if she was the one that left the note, then what exactly can she do? After school, Ichigo had told Rukia about what was on his desk earlier. She didn't know what to think of it at all, so she basically told him to be very careful when he faces her. Ichigo took the pill and ejected from his body. Kon had been in Ichigo's body before and had already been basically forced to not do anything in his body. She was very adamant at first, but then Ichigo basically gave her to Yuzu in that plushie and she calmed down fast. Ichigo went to the said address and looked around for a little while before hearing a rustling behind him. He turned and had to avoid a blue arrow that came flying at a high speed. He barely dodged and quickly drew his blade to face his attacker. He watched as Uriwashita came out of the bushes holding a large blue bow made out of spirit energy. He was amazed at what he was seeing and would have to ask Rukia just what the hell she was. Ichigo Kurosaki. Uryu started as she lowered her bow slightly. A boy with spiritual powers. Interesting indeed. I'm going to enjoy seeing just what you are. She pulled out a small blue pouch from her pocket and cracked it. Suddenly, a mass of hollows appeared within the world of living and surrounded them both. What the hell did you do, Uryu? Ichigo yelled at her as they stood back to back. I want to see you in action right now, Ichigo. She started as she raised her bow. Think of this as a competition, and your opponent is me. Ichigo smirked at her words and rushed into the horde of hollows. Ichigo rushed the horde of hollows in the park and started cutting them all down one by one. Uryu was holding her own, but took subtle glances at the teen. She was amazed that not only did he excel in destroying hollows, but his power was incredible. He was also very muscular and handsome. Uryu shook those thoughts out of her head and tried to stop her blushing. She continued to fire off arrows to the hollows and kept her distance from Ichigo to keep her mind clear. A little ways off from the battle, or massacre if you really want to get technical, Rukia stood there and watched in awe at how proficient Ichigo was. Yes, Uryu was impressive with her bow, but Ichigo was just on another level of power compared to her. Rukia also noticed something that Ichigo was doing that made her nervous. He was smiling and laughing. Ichigo was enjoying this. Killing hollows was enjoyable to him, something that only a few Soul Reapers back in the Soul Society would agree upon. Rukia continued to watch, unaware of the approaching figure behind her, until she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to see Kisuke standing there with her cane, and a black cat was on her left shoulder. Urahara? Rukia started in a confused tone. What are you doing here? Both Kisuke and the cat kept their eyes on Ichigo, but Kisuke managed to say something. So that's him. Wow, he looks incredible. Kisuke. The cat started, catching Rukia by surprise at a talking cat. What's up, Yuruchi? I want to eat him up so badly right now. Yuruchi said with a slight whimper as they continued to watch Ichigo destroy hollow after hollow. After a few minutes, all four females noticed that the hollows were running away from Ichigo. This confused them as Ichigo looked like he could keep going all day. Hey! He yelled out as the hollows all ran away through strange portals they kept creating to get away from him. Ichigo was confused by how they reacted and turned to see Uryu staring at him in disbelief. He sighed and marched over to her. She tensed at every step he took and looked like she was about to raise her bow, but she didn't. Or more like she couldn't. She felt some kind of heat going around her body as he walked over to her. She tried to focus, but her vision and senses became hazy. Ichigo stood in front of her and grabbed her by her shirt to pull her closer. The closeness was too much for her, and she blushed madly. "Just what the hell did you do to draw that many hollows here?" Ryu looked away from his gaze and answered in a low tone. "It wasn't supposed to draw that many in. Just a few." Ichigo could tell that she was very uncomfortable with how close he was to her, so he sighed again and let her go. "Fine." He started as he placed his blade on his shoulder. Ryu looked up at him and saw his stern gaze staring straight at her. "Next time you do something that stupid, I won't make the effort of saving your ass." He yelled at her, much to her surprise. "Save me," Ryu stammered out. "I wouldn't have needed your help dealing with any of these hollows. I could take on a strong one without needing anyone to save me." Just as Ichigo was about to retort, there was a large crack that formed in the sky. The two looked up to it and saw a massive hollow stepping out of it. Uryu and Rukia were terrified at seeing the large hollow in the world of the living. Kisuke and Yaruchi were surprised to see the Minos stepping out. Ichigo, on the other hand, was actually excited. He couldn't explain it, but he was very happy to get the chance to fight a strong hollow like this. He grinned at the Minos before taking his sword off his shoulder. "Now that's more like it," he said as he rushed over to the Minos. "No. Wait." Uryu yelled out as Ichigo rushed over. "Ichigo." Rukia was about to go over and stop him, but Kisuke snapped her fingers and Rukia dropped down like an intense weight had been placed on her. Ichigo didn't hesitate at all, charging at the Minos. He threw himself at its legs and went for a slash, but the Minos kicked him as he was coming to it. He skidded on the ground a little and recovered before smirking. He was enjoying this, and it didn't go unnoticed by the four. They were all just very surprised by the fact that Ichigo was enjoying this. Ichigo rushed over again, but stopped when he saw that the Minos had charged up some kind of beam in its mouth. He looked up to it in confusion for a while, before seeing the bright flash of energy coming straight at him. He was surprised but kept his cool as he raised his blade to block the attack. At first, he was struggling. The force of the attack was great and powerful, but he could feel something strangely familiar about this energy. Suddenly, Ichigo was filled with an intense power that was enough to lift up his blade and send the attack right back at the Minos. There was a large gust of wind that blew from his counter, and the Minos let out a cry of pain before retreating back into the crack in the sky. When the Minos was gone and the wind cleared, Ichigo raised his free hand into the air and shouted out. "Who else wants some?" The four were a mixture of amazed by his power and shocked by it at the same time. Kisuke and Yaruchi hadn't expected this at all. They knew he was strong and powerful, but they had no idea he was that strong. Rukia was absolutely stunned by how strong Ichigo was. She had known him long enough to analyze his power, but she had no idea it was this immense. Uryu didn't know what to think. She was just standing there swallowed up by his power, and to her, it was incredible. Unbeknownst to any of them, another woman had seen the entire thing as well. She was wearing a Soul Reaper uniform and had on a straw hat that was fastened to her head. She got one good look at the orange-haired teen and noticed two things. 1, he was incredibly powerful, and 2, he was a boy. She looked to the other side of the park and saw her target as well and gasped. "I've got to report this," she said as she opened the Sankamen and ran through it. That didn't go unnoticed by both Kisuke and Yaruchi. They knew that had to be someone sent to find Rukia. If their hunch was right, then the Soul Society would send high-ranking officers to get her to be executed for breaking a forbidden law. Soul Society. The woman with the straw hat passed through the gate rather quickly and made her way over to the Squad 6 barracks as quickly as she could. She pulled off her hat and let her short black hair flow with the wind passing through her. She entered the barracks and found the captain and lieutenant walking along to the gate. "Captain Kichiki," she said as she bowed to the woman. Captain Kichiki was a tall, slender woman with her hair in some kind of design. She wasn't wearing her white haori, but had a teal scarf around her neck. She looked at the woman with a monotone look in her eyes, but answered her regardless. "Aiko Saito," she started. "What is that you want to tell me, and where is Rukia?" Aiko looked up and answered her. "I found Rukia Kichiki, Captain, but I was stopped when a mass group of hollows attacked the area. I was about to intervene, but then a Minos Grand appeared, ma'am." This caught the red-headed lieutenant's attention as she gasped in shock. "No freaking way. A Minos attacked the world of the living and we didn't know about it." "Calm yourself, Renka," Byakuran said to her lieutenant. She looked back to Aiko. "How did you deal with it then?" "That's the thing, Captain, someone else did," Aiko said as she scratched the back of her head. This caught Byakuran's attention as she crossed her arms and asked. "Who?" Aiko looked around to make sure they weren't being listened to as she whispered to them. "A male Soul Reaper with bright orange hair." The guy with powers, Renka shouted out in surprise and shock. Even Byakuran was stunned by what she heard, but kept her composure nonetheless. She looked around and saw that some of her squad had heard the lieutenant's outburst. She gave them a glare that sent a sense of dread through them, and they scattered. She looked back to Ichigo and said to her. Me and my lieutenant will bring Rukia back. Inform the head captain that we have found her and are bringing her back for her trial of a forbidden technique, but know this Ichigo. She stood in front of the woman and glared daggers through her, making her very uncomfortable. Do not inform her of this male Soul Reaper. We will deal with him ourselves. Understood. Byakuran left before Ichigo could say anything and was followed by Renka. They made their way to the encampment gate and waited for it to open. While they waited, Renka had to ask her something. Captain, what did you mean by deal with him? You don't really mean that we'll kill him, do you? She asked with a bit of hesitation in her voice. If it comes to that, Renka, then yes. We will deal with him. Byakuran said without even turning around. Ichigo's room, that night. Ichigo had been in his bed after his initial defeat of the Minos Grand. He wasn't tired after the whole thing, just mainly irritated at everyone gawking at him afterwards. True, he didn't really mind all too much, but it still irritated him when any of them just stared at him like that. He could tell that if he were to go to the Soul Society that it would basically be like this, only 10 times worse. Damn. He said to himself as he stood up from his bed. Ichigo went out of his room and went to the bathroom, but when he went in, he heard mumbling and struggling noises. He followed the sound and found Khan taped behind the toilet with a note next to her. He untaped her and took her to his room. Ichigo. We have to save Rukia. She yelled out. Save her? What are you talking about? She's right here. Ichigo opened up his closet only to find it empty. What the hell? See, I told you. She left after putting this message on me. Khan held the note up to Ichigo and he took it. At first it made no sense, but with some careful thinking he cracked the code. It explained that she was leaving so he could be safe from the Soul Society when they came to take her. It also said that she would most likely be executed for her crimes and that he should just live his life without worrying about any of this anymore. What the hell is she thinking? Ichigo said to himself as he picked up Khan. He reached into her mouth and pulled out a green pill. After wiping it down, he ate it and went out through his window to find Rukia. While Ichigo was doing this, Rukia was already confronted by 2 familiar faces. She looked up and saw the Renji jump down with her sword drawn and do a downward slash to her. Rukia barely dodged it and got a cut on her cheek for her troubles. I see. Renka started. So you really did lose all of your power, Rukia? She said with a very cocky grin on her face. Well then, taking you back with us should be pretty damn easy. How did you find me, Renka? Rukia asked her friend. Renka grinned at her and placed her Zanpakuto on her shoulder. Pretty easy when we found out about the Minos and the male Soul Reaper. Rukia gasped at what she heard. Before she could ask, Renka interrupted her. Tracking his energy patterns was easy, especially with these goggles of mine. She motioned to the visor on her forehead. It tracked your faint spirit energy and led us right to you. Rukia looked over to her sister and saw that she wasn't even looking at her. Rukia felt a sense of dread as Renka made her way over to her, and the fact that she couldn't even defend herself filled that dread. Just as Renka was about to grab Rukia, an intense spirit pressure covered the area. Even Byakuran was taken aback from it. Renka was suddenly forced back when a massive blade appeared in front of her. She jumped back and the blade cracked the ground, sending shockwave throughout the area. Ichigo stood there with a combination of irritation and anger. So you were just gonna leave and thought I wouldn't try to find you? Ichigo asked Rukia without even turning around to her. Rukia felt even worse now and lowered her head in shame. So just who the hell are you two? Both Renka and Byakuran were still stunned to see a boy with Soul Reaper powers, but Renka was able to answer after shaking her head a little. My name is the last you'll ever hear, boy. She started as she placed her left hand over her Zanpakuto. Roar, Zabumaru. She swept her hand across the blade and it changed to a large blade with what looked like some kind of connections to it. She saw Ichigo's stunned expression and smirked to him. My name is Renka Abarai and this fight is over. She did a forward slash and the blade extended. Ichigo raised his blade to block it, but the force was too great. Renka's blade dug into Ichigo's shoulder and she pulled, letting the extensions tear into him. Ichigo dropped his blade and fell to his knees. Huh. Renka started as she walked over toward Rukia, who was in absolute shock. She had never seen Ichigo taken down so easily throughout the time she's been around him. Guess you were all hype and no skill. Ichigo was unresponsive. He hadn't moved at all, and it was making Rukia worried and the other two confused. Was he really this easy to deal with? Renka didn't want to believe that a mere human male who was given Soul Reaper powers and took out Minos was this easy to defeat. She went over to him and knelt down to get a good look at his defeated expression. She smirked at him before saying, "What? Don't tell me that you're really that damn weak, boy." When he heard that, something inside of him snapped. He had been called weak ever since his mother died by that voice. When he got his powers, the voice stopped and he thought that he had proven that he wasn't weak anymore. This girl had beaten him in one shot and was now calling him weak. That was the last straw. Ichigo grabbed his sword and slowly stood up. Renka grinned and backed away to prepare for an actual fight this time. Rukia was about to beg him not to continue, but she was silenced when she saw the energy coming from his sword. It was faint and hard to detect, but she could tell that it was black. Suddenly, an incredible amount of energy covered the entire street, surprising all three women. Ichigo looked at Renka with an evil-like smirk and rushed her. She prepared to block but was forced back by the force of his energy. She slid on a rail and the visor she had broke. "What in the hell is this?" she asked him as he looked at her with a mad grin on his face. "I don't know what this is," he started. His voice was a little different too. Almost a little distorted like. "But I can dig this." He ran over to her and she lazily dodged his slash. She looked down to see that her shihakusho had been cut, revealing her tattooed breast to the boy. Ichigo wasn't even paying attention to her chest as he jumped at her with help from the railing and went for another strike. Renka dodged again, only this time when she landed she fell to her knees. The pressure he was emitting was too much for her as she looked up to see Ichigo leap into the air. "I can't move," she thought to herself. "I'm so dead." Ichigo went to slash her down, but when the dust cleared, his blade was gone. "What the hell?" he thought to himself. "How did that happen? Was it her? No, it couldn't have been." He turned back to the other woman. "Was it her? No. She hasn't moved from that spot." Byakuren raised her hand and showed Ichigo his missing blade. He gasped and she dropped it to the ground. She reached for her sword and Ichigo prepared himself. When he did, suddenly she was moving past him and he felt that something wasn't right. After a few seconds, blood splattered out of 2 wounds on his chest. He fell to the ground in confusion, wondering just what had happened. "You're even slow falling down," she said as he finally hit the cold concrete. Rukia and Renka looked on at the scene in both horror and awe. Byakuren sheathed her blade and turned to her lieutenant. "Do you need a moment, Abarai, or do I need to get Rukia myself as well?" Renka nodded and went over to Rukia. "Let's go, Rukia." She led her to an open area where she was going to open the StringDman before asking her captain. "What about him?" Byakuren looked down on the boy and didn't even change her expression. "He'll bleed out if he's not treated. I cut his soul chain so he shouldn't be a problem." Just before she was about to turn and walk away, Ichigo had grabbed her by her hakama. She looked down and saw the grin on his face. "Don't think that that's gonna stop me." Byakuren was visibly irritated and was about to draw her blade again, but before she could, Rukia had kicked Ichigo's hand off of her. "Don't touch my sister," Rukia said in a cold tone. "What the hell, Rukia?" Ichigo said in a weak tone. "You'd die faster if you did that," she continued while not looking at him. "I'm going to face my fate for what I've done. You don't belong in this world with the rest of us, boy. So please." Her voice broke as she turned towards him. She had tears in her eyes and was conflicted with her emotions. "Live your life as an ordinary human. Before I got involved in it. Please, don't follow me." Ichigo could see how broken up she was about this whole thing and couldn't say anything. She turned around and noticed her sister standing there with her eyes closed and sword still sheathed. "Let's go, sister." Byakuren opened her eyes and turned to her lieutenant. Renka opened the StringDman with her Zanpakuto and resealed it. 3 hell butterflies came out of the StringDman and the 3 stepped in. The gate was starting to close and the last thing Ichigo saw before he lost consciousness was Rukia looking back to him. She mouthed off a few words that Ichigo didn't want to hear her say. "I'm sorry." A few minutes later. The gate had closed and rain started to pour on the town. Ichigo had fallen into unconsciousness and was now laying in a pool of his blood. He looked like he was really dead, at least that's what anyone else would have thought if it wasn't for some unknown force that had started to heal up his wounds. Hisuke had found Ichigo lying there and witnessed the strange healing that was taking place on the boy. The energy was a black color and had at least stopped the bleeding. Yuruchi was on her shoulder and was also staring at the event taking place in front of her in shock and awe. "Hisuke." The cat started. "I know, Yuruchi," Hisuke interrupted. "The power we've felt all this time wasn't Rukia's that was inside of him, it was this." She took her cane in her left hand while she held her umbrella in her right and poked the energy. Her cane's tip had been completely disintegrated, much to her surprise. "Okay. I think we'll need to get Tessai here to move him," Hisuke said in a defeated tone. "Oh, I'm gonna enjoy eating him up when he wakes," Yuruchi said within her voice. Now Yuruchi," Hisuke started as she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. "You know what we're gonna do. Help him first, then have him repay us," she said to her feline companion with a wink. Darkness was all that Ichigo could see right now. He was completely enclosed in it and couldn't move his body at all. Everything felt so heavy yet so weightless all at the same time. He felt as if he had died right then and there. Had he died? Was this what death felt like? But if that's the case, then how come he doesn't appear as a spirit? Is the process of death different for a Soul Reaper who has died, or is it just Ichigo being a male and dying with these powers? Either way, he didn't know what was going on, but for some strange and vague reason, he felt at peace. Ichigo. A low woman's voice said to him. Wake up. It was gentle yet full of power to it. Wake up, Ichigo. Ichigo slowly opened his eyes and was met with bright light shining all around. Squinted so his eyes could adjust to the light, but what was very strange was the fact that when he looked up, he saw a tall building. He was wearing his regular clothes before he left his home as well. Ichigo sat up and looked around to see that he was in some strange world filled with blue skyscrapers. He was on the side of one, yet he wasn't falling. He stood up and looked around for a brief moment before that voice started again, but this time it was weak and frail. Ichigo. He turned and saw the woman from his dreams lying on one of the skyscrapers, covered in some kind of blue bindings. She was pale white with long black hair that covered her body. She was pretty stacked as well, with large breast and a very curvy and luscious ass. She looked over to Ichigo and had pitch black eyes with yellower eyes to them. She looked like she was in pain as she was being held down by the blue bindings and had a face that looked borderline like she was pleading with him. Help me. Ichigo, please help me. She said in a frail tone as she lowered her head from what Ichigo could only assume was exhaustion. Without a moment's hesitation, Ichigo leapt off his skyscraper and went sailing over to her. He landed next to her and immediately remembered who this was. It was the woman from his dreams that kept calling him weak. He hadn't heard from her ever since he got his powers from Rukia. Ichigo simply assumed that he had proven to her that he wasn't weak and she stopped, but now that he saw her like this, something wasn't right. Ichigo shook his head and was going to figure that part out later, for now she needed his help and he had to help her. Ichigo grabbed at one of the bindings that were wrapped around her left leg and pulled. She yelped in pain at his force, causing Ichigo to release the bind. Ichigo didn't know how to save her if trying to free her causes her pain. He was starting to get worried when she started to breathe heavily and looked as if she was hyperventilating. Ichigo started to panic and tried to think of what to do, but he was stopped when she started to talk in her weakened state as the bindings started to wrap around her body. Ichigo. She started, looking up to him. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Ichigo didn't know what she was talking about, but knew that he couldn't lose her. She was a part of him somehow ever since that night, and he needed to know just who she was. Without another moment's hesitation, Ichigo grabbed at one of the bindings and clenched it tightly. He didn't know what this was or how it even was here, but he knew that he would have only one shot at this. This might hurt a little, okay? Just bear with it. Ichigo said to her right before her face was covered. Ichigo gritted his teeth and pulled on the bindings hard. The woman yelped in pain as the binding was ripped off of her. The second the bindings came off and were thrown to the side, they dissipated into the air. Ichigo started to pull at all the bindings, almost going deaf from her screams of pain, but he only had one more left. He reached for it, but the woman stopped him. No, Ichigo. She said with a little bit of power in her voice now. This last one is mine. Ichigo nodded to her request and backed away. The binding was attached to her neck, so she grabbed it with both hands. After taking a moment to prepare, she pulled at the binding and violently ripped it away from herself. She screamed in pain, this time louder than previous screams, and fell to her knees from the pain. Ichigo caught her before she could fully fall down to ground and held onto her. She breathed in and out slowly and tilted her head up to meet Ichigo's brown eyes. She smiled at him and shut her eyes before saying to him. Man, that was painful. Are you gonna be okay? Ichigo asked her in a concerned tone. Before Ichigo could even see it coming, she planted her into Ichigo's and held them there for several seconds. Ichigo was stunned at what she was doing, but didn't bother to stop her. Something about this was so wrong to him yet felt so natural. He leaned into the kiss and deepened it for a little longer until she pulled away. She smiled at him and stood up without his help. Now I'll be okay, Ichigo. Thank you. She said to him. Why did you kiss me? He asked as he stood up. Her smile grew even wider and she placed a finger on his dot. Wish I could tell you, but right now those horny bitches are all over you. And I think you'll be surprised at who else is there. She waved her other hand to him and a bright flash appeared from it. I'll see you in a bit, Ichigo. Before Ichigo could even say a word, his eyes opened suddenly and scared the 5 sets of eyes staring down at him. He rose up quickly and grabbed at his left shoulder where Renka had cut him, but there was no scar or even a cut. He felt where he was stabbed at by the other woman, and there was also nothing. Damn kid. Don't scare us like that. A male voice said from Ichigo's right. He turned and only saw a black cat with yellow eyes staring at him. Ichigo would have been confused by a talking cat, but right now that was the least of his worries. Ichigo, are you alright? A familiar voice said to him. Ichigo looked forward and saw that it was Orihime who asked the question along with Chad sitting next to her. They both looked visibly worried for their friend, and Ichigo could tell that something was a little off about this whole thing. Ichigo turned to his right and saw two other women sitting there with concern on their faces as well. One was a muscular woman wearing an apron, while the other had on a green and white bucket hat. "Yeah," he finally said to them. "I'm okay, but what happened? Where am I?" He finally registered an issue he had just ignored previously when he looked to the cat again. "And did that cat just talk to me?" "Well, to put it simply." The woman with the hat started as she took out a fan to cover her face. "You Ichigo Kurosaki are in my shop. My name is Kisuke Urahara. This is my assistant Tessai Tsukabishi." She motioned to the cat. "That's an old friend of mine, Yuruchi Shihoin. And you already know these two." She pointed to Chad and Orihim. "So tell me Ichigo, how do you feel?" He had to think for a moment about the question. How did he feel? It was a strange mixture of relief, anger, confusion and anxiety. He had no idea just what happened to him when he was fighting Renka before. He remembered everything, but there was a gap in between when she cut him and when his sword was cut in half. What had happened in between then? "Doesn't matter for right now Ichigo," the woman from before had said to him in his head. "Just hear them out first, then get Urahara to help you out. I'll take care of the rest afterwards." Ichigo nodded, which confused the five, then looked over to Kisuke. "I'm fine, but I need to get my powers back." This surprised the blonde but also intrigued her at the same time. He must not know about how he somehow healed himself earlier. "Wait a minute Ichigo." Orihim started, getting his attention. "You're not really thinking of going to save Rukia, are you?" She was concerned for him, obviously, but her voice had power behind it. This wasn't the exact same Orihim that Ichigo's always known. "That's exactly what I'm thinking Orihim," he said to her in a determined tone, causing her to blush. "Then we'll come and help you," Chad said in her usual tone. She gave him a thumbs up and smiled to him. Ichigo in turn smiled back at her, causing her to blush and look away. "Well, if that's the case, you two need to resume your training. I'll be waiting downstairs," Yuruchi said as she walked off. She stopped for a second and turned her head back to see Ichigo again. She smiled at him and said, "I'll enjoy breaking you in, Ichigo." Ichigo felt a shiver go down his spine as she said those words. The cat walked off and left the rest there for now. "Well, you two," Kisuke started as she and Tessai stood up. "I guess now would be the perfect time to explain yourselves to Ichigo here. It'll give me time to prepare to get his powers back." The two walked out of the room, leaving the two girls in there with Ichigo. Ichigo looked at the two and waited for one of them to start. Orihim decided to explain herself first. She took a deep breath and started. "My powers first started coming to me around the time my brother died," she started. "I didn't know what was going on at first. 1 minute he was gone, the next a hollow had appeared to devour his soul. He ran away, but the hollow noticed me staring at it and went to attack me. That was when my brother decided to act and flung himself into the hollow's way. He was eaten, but something happened just before he was gone. He reached out for me and touched these." She motioned to her hair and they burst into light, revealing 6 small fairies, all female, floating right next to Orihim. "They appeared and helped me defeat that hollow. I've been training with Yuruchi to control it properly for the past 2 years now." "Whoa," Ichigo said in surprise as he looked at the 6 fairies. They all looked at him with somewhat nervous expressions as they hid behind Orihim. "Are they afraid of me for some reason, Orihim?" "You could say that," she started while scratching the back of her head. "It's more of a reaction than actual fear. Your energy is kind of intimidating." "Oh," he started as he looked to them. "Sorry about that." He turned his attention towards Chad and asked her. "So what exactly happened to you, Chad?" She looked away from him again and started to explain. "This happened when I was attacked by a hollow a few months before I met you. I didn't know what it was at first, but I just remembered what my grandfather told me about using my strength to help others. I fought the hollow for a short time before this happened." She extended her right arm and it was now covered in a blue armor with red highlights around it. There was a shoulder piece to it that was also blue. "Yuruchi and Kisuke have been training me for about as long as they've trained Orihim. I'm sorry I never told you after you got your powers, Ichigo." There was a hint of despair in her voice as she said those words. "It's okay. I understand why neither of you told me," Ichigo said to them, getting their attention. "You don't have to apologize to me, okay?" They both smiled at him and watched as he stood up, revealing his toned and muscular body. They blushed and Ichigo noticed. He rolled his eyes and found his shirt on the ground next to the futon. Both of them regained their composures and led Ichigo to a trapdoor that had a ladder leading down. They went down and Ichigo was in absolute awe at how large the underground room was. He looked around and didn't even notice Kon as she ran over to him with fake tears in her eyes. "Ichigo," she yelled out as she jumped onto his chest and burst out in tears. "You scared me so much when I was told to bring your delicious body here." Ichigo wasn't in the mood to question what she was doing with his body while he was gone, so he simply detached her from his chest and threw her off to the side. He saw Kisuke standing there with her cane in hand and a smile on her face. He had a bad feeling about this, but relented and walked over to her anyway. "Alrighty, then Ichigo," she said in a jovial tone as she raised her cane up. "This should be easy for you hopefully." She shoved her cane into Ichigo's forehead and his soul came out. He was wearing the same clothes as before and had a chain attached to his chest that was connected to his body. As Ichigo caught himself, he watched as a red-haired girl cut his chain with a cleaver that was a little too big for her. Before Ichigo could protest, a hole appeared under him and he fell into it. Everyone looked down into it and saw Ichigo slowly stand back up. "Honestly Kisuke," Yurichi said to her friend. "You could have at least warned him you were going to do that." "I know that, but I thought this would be better," Kisuke started as she looked down to Ichigo. "Alright Ichigo. You have to make your way back up her before your soul chain is devoured completely." "What happens when that happens?" Ichigo asked her from the bottom of the hole. Kisuke dropped her smile and sighed. "You'll turn into a hollow and we'll have to kill you." She said those words with a hint of disdain behind them. Ichigo could see it in every single one of their eyes that they didn't want to do that. He didn't know how he was going to do this, but he had to get out of this hole and fast. His chain started to come alive and devour his chain at a quick rate, surprising everyone there. "Ms. Urahara?" Orihime yelled out to the confused store owner. "It's not supposed to be this quick for any individual," she said in a panicked tone. "Tesai, Yurichi, we need to." Before she finished her sentence, a white wall appeared around the hole and solidified. Everyone started to panic at just what happened and if Ichigo was okay. Ichigo's inner world. Ichigo opened his eyes and was back on a skyscraper in that world again. He looked around for that woman again and saw her lounging on a nearby skyscraper. She was clothed this time in an all-white Soul Reaper outfit, but she had the top opened up enough to show off her cleavage. Her hair was tied up in a ponytail and she was looking straight at Ichigo with a smile on her face. "Told you I'd see you in a bit Ichigo," she said as she stood up and leapt over to him. "Wait a sec," Ichigo said as she landed in front of him. "Kisuke said if my soul chain was completely gone that I'd turn into a hollow." "Yeah, but you don't need to worry about that," she said to him with a grin on her face. "Like I said before, you don't have to worry about it Ichigo. Now then, let's get you back in the game." Her smile grew as she held out her right arm and a sword appeared in it. It was a basic sword with really nothing too interesting about it. She tossed it to Ichigo and he caught it. He examined the blade for a few seconds before looking to her. "What's this for? I thought my Zanpakuto was huge," Ichigo said to her in a confused tone. "Well, someone is overcompensating for something that I actually know is there," she said to him, causing him to blush for the first time since he's gotten into this whole world. "That sword you lugged around wasn't yours. It was Rukia's." Ichigo perked an eyebrow to this. "What are you talking about hers?" "Easy. She gave you her powers and you just so happened to have an extraordinary amount of spirit energy," she continued. "You've had this amount of power ever since you were born Ichigo." Ichigo gasped at her words and even more when he saw pull out a massive cleaver from thin air. The cleaver had bandages for around the hilt and no guard. It was wide on the front side while being black on the back. She looked at the shocked look on his face and smiled again before planting the blade into the skyscraper. "Now that has your attention," she started as she leaned on the cleaver. "You need to learn my name and how to use my power." Ichigo gained a smirk of his own face and took a stance with the blade in his hand. "Then let's do this." She grinned and pulled the cleaver out. She rushed over to him and clashed her blade with his. The force of her blow pushed him back far as she flung him around with just that one blow. Ichigo was stunned for a second, but quickly moved out of the way when he saw the cleaver flying at him at incredible speeds. He continued to dodge and stood up trying to analyze her fighting style. It was strange to him. It was sporadic yet accurate, powerful yet deadly. He dodged several of her swift strikes and blocked a few of them only to be pushed back once again. He fell to one knee and watched as she twirled the cleaver into the air. "Come on Ichigo," she said to him in a seductive tone. "Don't tell me that killer instinct of yours just ran out." "Instinct?" Ichigo asked himself in a low tone. He started to remember when he fought the mass group of hollows. Or the time when he first attacked the hollow that had his sister. And now he started to remember just what happened after Renka had cut him down so easily. It was his instincts that made him release that energy, but it was being constrained by Rukia's power. He stood up and looked at her as she caught the cleaver and placed it on her shoulder. "So?" she started with a grin. "You figured it out yet?" Ichigo looked at her then closed his eyes and let that instinct take over like before. He could feel it now. That power, that intensity, that will to defeat his enemies. It was incredible to him as he felt some kind of change in his body. He opened his eyes and saw the cleaver now in his hand and her standing directly in front of him. She was smiling at him as she saw that his eyes were now just like hers. She placed her hand on his face and he could feel a mask forming on him. The mask was white with a black wing on the right side that had a red highlight around it. The mask had white teeth to it that also had red highlights going around it. Ichigo could feel it, he could feel that power from before, only now it was his own. He looked at his left hand and clenched it, seeing that it changed to that white color like it did before. When he unclenched it, his hand went back to its normal color. He looked back to her and saw her smile. She now had wide eyes with yellower eyes as now. "Well, Ichigo," she said to him. "What's my name?" Ichigo looked at her and then to his Zanpakuto. He looked back at her and said in a distorted tone. "Zanjetsu. Underground training area." Everyone had been trying to crack open the shell that had formed to cover the hole for a few minutes now. Yuruchi had even went into her normal form and tried to her hand at it. This was all to no avail. Every time they would crack it, it would fix itself faster than they could react. After several minutes, Kisuke had assumed the worst possible thing that could have happened. "Eyes," she started in a grim tone. Everyone had stopped their assault on the floor and looked over to her. "I think that." An intense spiritual pressure suddenly dropped down on everyone in the room and the floor, keeping Ichigo in the hole cracked. "Everybody get back," Yuruchi yelled out as they scattered. The floor began to completely crack all around and a black energy seeped out of them. After a few seconds, the floor blew apart and the black energy flew out of it. The energy bounced off of the ceiling and landed hard on the ground, kicking up dust in the process. The group had prepared themselves for an attack as they saw red eyes through the smoke and immediately tensed up. For several uninterrupted seconds there was nothing but dust and those red eyes staring at them. Then the eyes started to move up as if the person was standing. A hand appeared out of the dust that was completely white and waved across the dust quickly. In one swift motion, the dust was gone and everyone got a really good look at Ichigo now. He was in his Soul Reaper uniform like how he should, but they also saw the cleaver in his right hand and the mask. Ichigo stood there motionless for a few seconds before moving his free hand to his mask. He grabbed at the eye holes and pulled to reveal his face to them. He placed the mask on top of his head and looked over to them with his new eyes. Ichigo saw the looks of shock in their eyes and smirked. "Well," he started as he placed his cleaver on his shoulder. "That wasn't as hard as I thought it would be." Ichigo stood at the ready. He defended himself as everyone continuously threw attack after attack at him. They were amazed by how his power worked. It was fluid yet sporadic at the same time, while also being heavy with power. He would also use various different techniques that threw everyone off at some moments, like using his speed to confuse one while attacking the other. They had been at this for a few days now and were preparing to leave first thing in the morning. Ichigo had progressed tremendously since he emerged from the ground with that mask on. Kisuke had done a few tests on him and found out that he somehow had hollow powers before his soul chain was eaten away. The girls were both surprised and confused at this new information. Ichigo had already figured that out already. It was night time when Ichigo and Kon left for home. She had been accompanying him to his training sessions to both get back into his body and to see his sexy muscles through his outfit. It was strange for her to find anyone other than Rukia attractive, but she was slowly starting to feel this way toward the orange-haired teen. She wasn't the only one, as apparent from the way the rest of the group that trains with him have made easy to figure out. As Ichigo and Kon reached the house, Kon leapt onto his shoulder and just sat there. "What's up, Kon?" Ichigo asked her as he opened the door and went inside. "Nothing," she said in a low tone. "Just wanted to touch you for a few seconds." Ichigo didn't particularly mind. He had started to get used to being either stared at or groped by both Kisuke and especially Yuruchi. A little closeness from the plushie wasn't going to kill him. He went into his room and set Kon down on the table before going to the bathroom to take a shower. As he did this, Kon sat there and wondered just how everything was going to go tomorrow. If she had her own body, then she wouldn't hesitate to do all she could to help Ichigo out. She could only wonder how she could help out properly, besides keeping his body safe when he left. A sudden thought came to mind. After Ichigo and the girls leave tomorrow, she could ask Kisuke about a body. Ichigo came back into the room dressed in his shorts and a loose shirt. He rubbed the back of his head and yawned. Kon noticed this and watched as he got on his bed to sleep. Ichigo?" She started hesitantly. "Yeah?" he said to her as rested his head on the pillow. For a few brief seconds, Kon was silent. Then she decided to just say it. "Just be careful when you go to save Rukia." Ichigo looked over to her and smiled, sending a chill through her soft and plushy body. "I will. I promise." And with that, Ichigo fell asleep to prepare for the morning. The next day, Urahara's shop. Ichigo was walking to the shop with Kon on his shoulder once again. The two had spoke earlier, and Ichigo made it very clear not to do anything crazy with his body other than take out Hollow. Kon knew what he was talking about. When she had possession of his body the first time at school, the very first thing she did was head to the bathroom and gaze at Ichigo's body in full. It was very awkward from what Khan told him when some random guy walked in to see Ichigo without any clothes and standing in front of a mirror. When the two got to the shop, they noticed that Chad was already there and standing alongside Kisuke. Ichigo was taken aback a little when he saw Chad's outfit. She was in tight black leggings and a grey top with no sleeves and was pretty tight on her. Ichigo walked over to them and Chad noticed how he was staring at her outfit. She blushed and held her head down. "That's a nice outfit, Chad," Ichigo said to her with a smile. She looked over to him and smiled a little. "Thanks, Ichigo. I usually don't let the guys see me wear this when I work out. So could you please not tell them what I wear?" Ichigo nodded to her and that eased the tall girl a little. Ichigo looked over to Kisuke and noticed that Yuruchi wasn't out here. He tensed a little and hoped that she wouldn't try to. "Gotcha, berry hunk. Surprise him." Yuruchi wrapped her arms around the back of his neck and whispered those words into his ear. This sent a shiver down his spine from her closeness and where one of her hand were reaching down to his chest. Ichigo was a little frozen by how he could never see her coming and hoped that this would end soon. "When are you gonna let me have a taste of that strawberry milk of yours, Ichigo?" she whispered again as she reached lower. "This kitty's thirsty." "Nope. Still going." That was when Orihime showed up and saw what her teacher was doing to Ichigo. She was wearing grey sweatpants and a pink shirt that hugged her curves. "Iruchi," she started in a semi-irritated voice that caught the cat's attention. "You promised not to do anything to Ichigo until after we save Rukia and head back here." "What do you mean until after?" Ichigo asked her as Iruchi continued to feel him up. At this point, both Chad and even Kisuke were a little jealous of how bold Yuruchi was compared to them. Kisuke would tease and feel him up a little, but would never do anything like this. Chad could never do this to her friend, and Khan could never find the courage. Orihime just seemed to be pretty annoyed by her teacher's antics more than anything. Fine," Yuruchi said to her first student and let go of Ichigo. "But I'm not gonna wait after we get back," she continued as Ichigo turned to her. "As soon as we get back, the second we do, I'm gonna rock your world, Ichigo." Ichigo felt very unsafe around this horny woman, but decided to ignore it for now. "Well then," Kisuke started after she cleared her and shook off the thought of being in bed with Ichigo. "We're almost ready. Just waiting on our last member." Ichigo looked to the shopkeeper confused. He knew that he, Chad, Orihime and Yuruchi were going, but who else was coming with them? His thoughts were answered when Urashida appeared in front of the shop. He looked at her in confusion but also surprise at what she was wearing. It was some kind of white uniform that had blue highlights all around it. She saw the way he was staring at her and gritted her teeth. She looked away from him and said, "Stop gawking at me. Pervert." Ichigo looked away while shaking his head. "Alrighty then." Kisuke started as she poked Khan in the head with her cane. Her pill came out of her mouth and into Ichigo's hand. He ate it and left his body before he started to stretch. As he did this, all 6 females stared at him intensely and with various ideas in their heads of what they would love to do with him. Ichigo noticed this and rolled his eyes. "You were saying, Kisuke?" he said to the shopkeeper. "Huh?" Kisuke said before shaking her head again. "Oh right. Well, if you all would follow me." She stammered as she tried to pry her eyes away from Ichigo. They followed her down to the training grounds and were met by Tessai. The muscular woman positioned herself next to some type of device planted into the ground and held her arms to it. Kisuke positioned herself to another one and did the same as Tessai. "Alright." Kisuke started as both she and Tessai poured some spirit energy into the devices. "Once we open the portal, head in and start running to the exit. Yuruchi knows the way and someone that can help get all of you into the Sirte, so she'll lead the way." Everyone nodded and waited for a moment. Suddenly the portal opened and the 5 ran inside. Once through it, the portal closed. "Ryu." Kisuke started as she stood up and wiped her forehead. "That took a while to complete, but at least they'll get there alright." Boss." Tessai started with a semi-concerned tone of voice. As impressive as that was, how exactly are they supposed to get back? Kisuke's jaw dropped as she realized this just now. "Oh shit. Kisuke." Khan started as she approached the shopkeeper. Kisuke looked to her and could see a determined type of look on her face, despite it being Ichigo's. "I don't know if this'll make a difference in this whole thing, but I want to be able to help fight without being in Ichigo's body." Kisuke immediately perked at her words and smiled deviously. "Bangai Precipice World." Kisuke wasn't lying when she said to start running. As soon as the 5 touched down into the long and creepy area, a massive dark monster suddenly showed from the other side of the tunnel. They ran to the other side of the tunnel while the thing was chasing them and eventually saw a light. "Through here. Come on." Yuruchi yelled out as she leapt through the light. She was followed by the others and they found themselves falling from the sky. For a short moment they panicked, but soon enough got their footing. Ichigo and Uryu took to using their Riatsu to stand on the ground, while Orihime used her shield to safely send her and Chad to the ground below. When they touched down, Yuruchi was waiting for them. They landed in an open field that had trees not too far from it. Impressive. She started. Quick thinking will definitely help when we get inside, but first things first. She walked over to Ichigo. What now? He asked with a sigh as he saw how she was staring at him. Since we're here, you're gonna have to stay out of sight. She said in an almost serious voice. The moment anyone sees you they'll be all over you in no time, so you stay behind for now. Ichigo would have protested, but saw that she was right. If the way everyone here reacts to him is any indication, then it would be like that only 10 times worse if others saw him. With a sigh Ichigo relented and nodded his head in confirmation. Okay then. Yuruchi started while turning to the others. We're heading to an old friend of mine that'll get us inside the Sirte. She's a bit of a handful, so be as nice as possible. Understood? Yes ma'am. Orihime said in a cheerful tone. Dad gave a thumbs up and Uryu simply nodded. We'll come back and get you when I smooth talk her into helping us out. Yuruchi said to Ichigo. He responded with another nod seeing as though he was in a world where men don't exist in. The four left Ichigo out on the grassy field they were at and went on. Ichigo crossed his arms and decided to find some sort of way to pass the time. Since he was practically stuck in this area he looked around for a tree or something to lean on. After a few minutes and passing by a couple of trees that looked promising, Ichigo came across this one tree that looked just perfect. It was large all around and had plenty of open space for him to stretch out, along with very bright red roses along the branches and trunk. Ichigo smiled at it as he walked over and laid against it, slouching so he could be in a somewhat seated position. He took a deep breath and felt the cool breeze hit him. The field was visible from where he was laying out along with some more open area. The peace and serenity was more than enough to make the orange-haired teen so relaxed that he fell asleep right there. 10 minutes later. Man, I can't believe that the roses are finally coming in. A woman said as she started making her way through the forest to a large tree. She was fairly short, had long brown hair and fair skin. She saw the roses in their entirety and smiled. They're beautiful. Just as she was finally at the tree she heard the sound of someone breathing deeply, almost as if they're asleep. She looked to the other side of the tree and saw a Soul Reaper's outfit first. A Soul Reaper? She thought to herself. Here in this remote area? Why exactly would she be? That was when she got a good look at the rest of the Soul Reaper. From the orange hair to the sleeping face and large blade, she saw that this wasn't a woman. The face was too masculine to be a woman's face, so she quietly made her way toward the sleeping Soul Reaper. As she got a little closer, she suddenly remembered that not everyone has a feminine look to them. She knelt down to the Reaper and poked their cheek lightly. Excuse me ma'am. She said in a slightly fearful tone. There was no telling if the Soul Reaper was a noble clan member like the last Reaper that showed up this close to her village was, so she was cautious. When she noticed that the Reaper wasn't responding, she poked again, this time a little. Excuse me. Ms. Soul Reaper, are you okay ma'am? Ichigo felt the poke and slowly woke up from his nap. As he sat up some more, the woman noticed that the Soul Reaper must have been very flat-chested as she could only see muscles through the top. Ichigo rubbed at his eyes and looked over to see a woman with brown hair staring at him. He tensed for a second and got to his feet quickly, scaring her in the process. I'm sorry ma'am. She started as she bowed in apology. I'm sorry I woke you from a peaceful nap. Please don't ransack my village like the last one did ma'am. Ichigo was taken aback from this and felt conflicted. She thought he was a woman so that was good in a sense, but she was scared of what he might do based on the actions of another. If he were to say something, then she would know that he was a male and probably spread the word. That was something that he wasn't looking forward to. Ichigo decided to go with the former and leave her so he could stay incognito for now, but it seems fate was a cruel mistress to him as a hollow suddenly appeared from the forest. The woman stood up and was shocked to see one here. The hollow was some kind of frog monster with a very long tongue and pale green skin. The mask was in the shape of a frog and had no teeth. Ichigo didn't hesitate to reach for his blade and unsheath it. He kept his eyes on the hollow but spoke to the woman. You might want to stand back. He said to her in his voice. The woman had never heard a woman with that deep of a voice before and just had to ask. I've never heard a voice like yours before ma'am. Do you have some kind of disability or something? Nah. Ichigo started as he grinned from ear to ear at the hollow. I'm just a guy who hates it when a hollow appears out of nowhere. He rushed toward the hollow and slashed at its mask before it could do anything. When it faded away, Ichigo realized too late what he had said as he was caught in that battle-ready trance of his. He turned to see the woman staring at him with her jaw completely dropped as she now realized that this Soul Reaper was a man. Ichigo saw that the woman was staring at him with wide eyes and froze. How could he be so careless when he was told not to let anyone see him? That's when he heard a snickering in his mind and immediately knew that it had to be Zangetsu's doing. She must have been the reason he always got into his fights now like this. He looked over to the woman and saw just how shocked she was. He sheathed his cleaver with the bandages and tried to put everything into words. Obviously, he had nothing. The woman quickly stood up and ran away from him without even looking back. Ichigo sighed and knew that this wasn't going to end well. He flashed up above the tree line and sat on one of the thick branches. I am so screwed, he said to himself. Oh come on Ichi. Zangetsu started in his mind. Maybe being the apple of everyone's eye won't be so bad. Yeah, and maybe my pelvis will be shattered completely by the time we attempt to leave, Ichigo said to her. He started to get a little comfortable and leaned against the tree. When he did, he fell asleep pretty fast. The woman ran back to her village in a dead sprint and stopped in front of a building. Toka, you okay? A woman with short black hair asked her as Toka rested on her knees. Yeah, Toka said in between breaths. I'm fine Akira, but I have got to tell you something incredible. What is it? Akira tilted her head in confusion as she asked. Toka took a deep breath and answered with a smile. I saw a man. Akira went wide-eyed at what Toka had just said to her. There wasn't supposed to be males in this world at all, and none of the women there that weren't soul reapers had ever seen a male before. If it wasn't for classes taught by elders, then none of them would know what a male would even be. Toka had a massive smile on her face as Akira started to think of the various things they could do with this man. Toka. She started with a filled grin. Where is he? The two noticed that others had overheard what their conversation and were wondering the exact same thing. Toka smiled and said to them. Follow me. Shiba compound. Alright girls, this is Kukaku's place. Yuruchi said to the three as they approached the large building with strange arm-shaped pillars, holding up a sign that said Shiba on it. Now remember what I said about her girls. She can be a handful unless you know her well enough. With that, the four walked along to the front entrance and were stopped by two tall and muscular women. They looked practically the same aside from hair length and stood in front of Yuruchi with surprised expressions. Lady Yuruchi. The one on the right stated. This is very surprising. The one on the left stated. If you are here to see Kukaku, then she's inside in her usual spot. Yuruchi thanked the two and went inside. The four went through a few halls before getting to a door that they could hear yelling from. Will you shut your damn Genji? A voice yelled out. I said I was sorry Kukaku. What else do you want me to say? Another voice yelled out. Well it sounds like Kukaku is in a good mood. Yuruchi said to the three with a smile. She opened up the door and walked in to see Kukaku and her sister Genji. Genji was as tall as her sister and almost looked the same as her. She had fair skin and short black hair that she kept under a white and red do-rag. Right now, she was being manhandled by Kukaku as she had her by the collar of her top. The two were arguing over something most likely before they noticed Yuruchi standing in the doorway. Yuruchi? Kukaku said as she dropped her sister and went over to her old friend. She stood in front of her and grinned from ear to ear. Well, haven't seen this sexy side of you in a long ass time. What brings you here my sweet little puss? That was when she saw the other three girls behind Yuruchi and visibly deflated. She looked back to her friend and saw that devious grin that usually always said one thing in particular for the fireworks specialist. Oh no. She started as she walked back inside. Come on Kukaku. Yuruchi started as she went inside followed by the three. You haven't even heard my offer yet. I don't care. Kukaku said as she turned to her friend. You show up out of the blue and have that look on your face. That just means you want something and refuse to stay over when I give you what you want. Her voice was getting louder and angrier by the word. I know. Yuruchi started as she raised her hands in front of her. But I promise you that this'll be worth it and I'll be staying here for the next month if that sweetens the deal. Oh no. Kukaku started again as she walked toward the exit. She was followed by everyone else. There is no deal this time. You are not gonna use whatever it is that you need from me and then disappear again. I refuse to help you no matter what your deal is. Yuruchi had a smirk on her face as she was about to speak. Well then I guess you don't want to meet him then. This caught everyone's attention as Kukaku stopped and turned to Yuruchi. Did you just say him? Yuruchi crossed her arms. I did. His name is Ichigo Kurosaki and he is the first and so far only male soul reaper. Both Kukaku and Genji stared at the flash goddess in disbelief. A male soul in the soul society. If what they were hearing was true, then they would be fools to at least not hear her out. It seems that caught your attention. Yuruchi started as she motioned back to the room. Let's talk over some sake and discuss just what we need Kukaku. Kukaku hesitated. She didn't want to be putty in Yuruchi's hands once again, but she really wanted to know just who this male was. If there was any shred of defiance in her being, it was all taken away from then on. Fine. The forest. It had been pretty quiet now ever since Ichigo fell asleep. He was in his inner world once again training with Zangetsu. For Hollow, she sure was rather docile when it came to Ichigo's soul. From what Ichigo could remember Rukia telling him about hollows, they lived to consume souls and were nothing but mindless monsters who lived to cause chaos. Zangetsu was not like that at all. Sure, she was a little mischievous at times when it came to battles, but all in all she's a pretty reasonable and strong woman. Ichigo saw no type of savagery or mindlessness to who she was. Was that a lie to get him to eradicate all hollows that he saw? Heads up. Zangetsu yelled out when Ichigo spaced out on her. She had thrown her cleaver, which were opposite colors of Ichigo's, at him, and he wasn't blocking. Ichigo quickly focused and did his best to repel the attack. He raised his cleaver in front of him to block it. He succeeded in blocking it, but the force of the throw caused him to fly back into one of the sides of a skyscraper. Ichigo! Zangetsu yelled out as she ran over to him. She was clearly concerned for his well-being from the tone of her voice, and that bugged Ichigo. He stood up through the dust and rubble and met her worried eyes with his own. She sighed before yelling out. What the hell was that? You can get yourself killed out there if you just suddenly space out like. Ichigo stood up fully and patted the dust off of him. Sorry Zangetsu. He said in a somewhat defeated tone. He planted his cleaver into the ground and sat down next to it. Zangetsu raised an eyebrow before placing a hand on her hip and asking him. Okay, what's wrong Ichigo? I just don't understand. He started. I was told by both Rukia and the girls on occasion that all hollows were mindless monsters, but you're different. You've been nothing to me but helpful by training me and pushing me to get stronger. I'm just so confused. Zangetsu looked at him wide-eyed before sighing. She sat next to him and placed her head on his shoulder as they looked out into the rest of the world. They're wrong you know. She started, getting his attention. They're wrong. Not all hollows are monsters. You just have been fighting the lower class hollows that run on pure instinct. It's not their fault that they're like that. They eat souls to evolve, and the more you evolve, the more powerful you become. The more powerful you become, the less of that hunger lingers in your soul. And the less that the hunger lingers in your soul, the more human you become. Ichigo raised an eyebrow to those words. Why would they want to be more human? Every hollow has their own reason for wanting to achieve the status of an ranker in their lives. Zangetsu started. Some seek the power, some wish to get rid of the hunger for souls, some seek it out to discover a new purpose for living, and some seek to remember who they were before they died. She looked to Ichigo and saw his confused look when she said that. Remember Ichigo, all hollows are just souls that were corrupted and became that way. They used to be people just like you are, and they sometimes retain even a small fragment of who they used to be. Those types of hollows are the ones who have the most drive to becoming an ranker. So what does that make you? Ichigo asked her as she finished. I'm a part of your soul Ichigo. Zangetsu told him with a smile. I'm alive because of you. I know you have a lot of questions for me Ichigo, but I'm honestly not ready to tell you the answers yet. And you're not ready to hear them yet, so I'll make you a deal. You become stronger. Strong enough to protect the people closest to you, which will be a lot by the way, and always strive to be better. You do that and I'll tell you everything, I promise. She stood up and extended her hand out to him. Ichigo smiled and took her hand into his. She lifted him up and smiled as well. Deal? Good, cause right now you got company. She said as she started to fade away. Ichigo was confused for a second until he was in darkness and felt hands all over his chest and abs. The hands were roaming his body and gentle enough to be soothing, but rough enough to also feel a little uncomfortable. Especially when one hand was going to his crotch. That was when Ichigo opened his eyes and saw several women sitting around him. They were caught off guard by his sudden awake and backed away slowly. Ichigo sat up quickly and a few things happened at that moment. 1. He felt a sharp pain in his back. 2. He noticed that there were around 10 or 12 women around him. 3. His shahakusho was opened up to reveal his body. And 4. His Zanpakuto was still in the tree where he was laying down at before. What hell happened? Ichigo said to himself as he saw that he was down here and Zangetsu was up there. He's awake. What do we do now? I want to see just what it looks like. You and everyone else that lives in the village. Ichigo caught a couple of the low-talking conversations around him and didn't like where this was going. He had to act fast before he would be reversed gangbanged by these curious women around him. Fortunately, or unfortunately depending on who you ask, the sound of a hollow roaring several meters away deterred the women's advances. They all turned to see a large, bird-like hollow that was coming towards them all. Everyone stood up and backed away slowly as the hollow approached them. They were all too scared to really do anything, even scream, and that was making this whole situation even more unbearable. The hollow got a glance at the Soul Reaper on the ground behind the women and grinned. A Soul Reaper eh? It started in its distorted feminine voice. I guess I'll take the main course now rather than these appetizers. The hollow charged forward and there were several shrieks from the women for a second. Then suddenly and without warning, Ichigo stood up and grabbed the hollow bites with his bare hand. Albeit his hand was the color of his hollows and shrouded by the feathers of the hollow, so no one could see it. The hollow looked at Ichigo in utter disbelief as it looked up and down his still exposed chest. Ichigo smirked and threw the hollow into the air with sheer force. He flashed up to his Zanpakuto, grabbed it and slashed the hollow before it could even comment about his abs. He landed a little ways off from the stunned women and placed Zangetsu on his shoulder. Damn. I needed that. Ichigo said to himself. He turned to the women and saw their stunned expressions. He had grown used to seeing females surprised when they saw him nowadays, so their looks mostly had him chuckling under his breath. After a few seconds Ichigo tightened his Shihakusho to its normal look and placed Zangetsu back in her place. He looked over to see that they had all moved closer to him without him even knowing. They all looked amazed and awestruck by what he just did and how nice he looked doing it. "You were amazing." The one named Toka said to him before the rest broke out in an outroar. Ichigo had tried and failed to tone down the situation, but was only making it worse every time he spoke. His voice was enough to get the girls riled up and surround him. Ichigo had tried to get out of there without hurting a single one of them, but that option sounded a lot better than being groped by almost a dozen women. Ichigo was about to really start swinging when he felt a hand on his crotch, but luckily for him he was rescued by Yaruchi. "Wait a sec." Ichigo thought to himself as she lifted him up with one hand and started to flash out of the area. "How is this any better?" "Damn it, Ichigo," Yaruchi said in what sounded like an irritated tone of voice. Ichigo actually thought that maybe she was more angry than her usual self. That would have been great for once out of her. "How could you let that happen, Ichigo? The only woman who can grope you is me. One can dream." Yaruchi flashed them both over to a building with large arms in front of it, holding up a banner saying Shiba. Ichigo shook out of Yaruchi's grasp so he could land on his own. Yaruchi apparently didn't mind, because now she can run alongside him now, very closely. After the uncomfortable closeness, the two landed in front of Orihime Chad, Uryu and 4 other women that Ichigo didn't know. They stared at him in shock, and Yaruchi started to laugh. "I told you, Kukaku, that he was real," Yaruchi said in between breaths. She regained her composure for only a brief moment and quickly lost it when she saw Genji approaching Ichigo slowly. "It's not like he'll bite," she said in between breaths again, before she latched herself on his back, surprising the 4. "Unless you want him to." Genji blushed madly at her words, while Kukaku had to look away for a moment. Just out of sheer curiosity. Ichigo started as he shrugged Yaruchi off of him. "Just what exactly is going on here? I thought we were going to save Rukia, not flaunt me around like some kind of decoration." That was when Kukaku spoke up to him. "You have yourself a deal, Yaruchi." Orihime was hopping for joy while Uryu and Chad simply smiled at her words. Yaruchi was ecstatic at what Kukaku said and hugged Ichigo again. "Alright then. I guess now the only thing to do is wait for the morning to get this started," Kukaku said with a big toothed grin to Ichigo that sent a cold shiver up his spine. "What just happened?" he asked, but nobody answered. "Remember the deal though, Kukaku," Yaruchi started in a sultry tone. "You may get him when we're about to leave, but I get first dibs beforehand." "Whoa, hold up," Ichigo yelled out when he heard that. "You just better damn well make sure nobody, especially my idiot sister, gets to him before you do," Kukaku continued. "Oh, I'll make sure none of them get their hands on my berry," Yaruchi said as she started to feel Ichigo up like the times before. "Okay, wait one damn minute," Ichigo yelled out even louder than before and shook Yaruchi off of him. This time it got everyone's attention. "Just what the hell did you do, Yaruchi? Pimp me out to a woman I don't even know?" "Actually, that's exactly what I did," Yaruchi said with a smile. "Kukaku is gonna help the 6 of us get inside the Sirte, and in exchange for her help, when we get back you're gonna do whatever she asks you to do to her." Ichigo looked over to Kukaku and saw a very wicked smile from her. "Oh, and I'm gonna enjoy you, berry boy." Ichigo visibly deflated at hearing this. At least it can't get any worse now. Right. The next day was the day that the now 6 were heading off to the Sirte. Their newest addition was Kukaku's younger sister Genji. She wore some kind of baggy fireworks-based outfit that she was trying to show off to Ichigo. He thought it looked, in his words, nice on you. That was more than enough to make her blush at him. The 6 were standing in the cannon and preparing to be fired into the Sirte. Last night was the only time they learned how to use the device to create a protective dome around them. Surprisingly enough, Ichigo somehow was able to generate the dome on his own and have it be just as strong if not stronger than everyone else's put together. "Okay," Kukaku yelled out from the outside. "Here we go." She ignited the cannon and sent them flying into the air at breakneck speeds. The dome held out for the entire ride as they made their way to max height before dropping. The speed of the fall was incredibly fast, and for a split second it seemed that time had stopped slightly for them. That was when they hit the protective barrier above the Sirte. Captains Pav, Dashiraku and Shizuku. Dashiraku Yukitake and Shizuku Kairaku were having a nice conversation a minute before the barrier was being attacked. They were both walking along the streets together like they have over the centuries of their friendship. Dashiraku was a tall and slender woman with long white hair, while Shizuku was a more curvy woman with short black hair under her hat. They were walking along until they saw that the barrier was being penetrated. "What in the world?" Dashiraku said as she and Shizuku looked up at the spectacle. "Well, old girl." Shizuku started as she tilted her hat up to see the dome start to crack. "It looks like we have some Balsi intruders." Shiroyuki Hitsugaya. At the Squad 10 barracks, a girl with short white hair, a captain's haori on, and a long sword strapped to her back was looking out her window at what was going on. She was very petite. She couldn't believe just what was going on, and it was made all the more apparent when her busty lieutenant burst through the door. "Captain," Ranjiku stated to her captain. "Are you seeing this?" "Hard not to, Ranjiku." Shiroyuki Hitsugaya started. "No doubt I'll be summoned if whatever that is breaks through the barrier. Which will mean more paperwork for me," she said in an irritated tone. Tsukiha and Kaname, its a gender-neutral name. On a hill not too far out from the Sarate were two women standing in front of a grave. On was a dark-skinned woman wearing a visor, had her hair tied up, and was substantially busty. The other was a much larger woman wearing some kind of helmet and had a toned figure under all those baggy clothes. They wore a captain's haori and looked at the grave. They were brought out of their pseudo-trance when they felt a strong spiritual pressure heading straight for the Sarate barrier. They looked over and saw that the barrier was actually cracking, surprising both women. "That's impossible," Tsukiha Kamamura stated in a surprised tone under her helmet. "We have to leave now, Tsukiha," Kanam Tausen said to her. Tsukiha nodded and they flashed away from the grave. Sarako and Gina. In a secret lab in an unknown location, a woman with brown hair and glasses looks over some data to help with her future plans. She had a figure that screamed sex appeal, despite wearing baggy clothing. She looked to be in deep thought as she propped her head on one of her arms for support. It wasn't until a silver-haired woman appeared out of a dark corner and walked fairly quickly to her that she actually stopped focusing. The silver-haired woman had her clothes on her tight and exposed much of her cleavage. "Have you heard, Captain Aizen?" Gina Ichimaru asked her. Sarako looked at her confused and asked. "What exactly do I need to hear, Gina?" Gina gave one of her creepy smiles. "We have intruders." Denpachi Zaraki. The muscular woman with spiky hair that had bells on it stared straight at the breaking barrier. She was wearing an eye patch, had a tattered captain's haori, and her shihakusha was opened up, revealing her large bandage-covered breast. She grinned wildly and looked on, hoping that whoever was breaking through was a strong fighter. "I'm gonna have me some fun today." Mary Kuritsuchi. In the Squad 12 labs, a clown-faced woman watched with intrigue as the barrier began to break apart. She had an average body that she kept hidden within her clothing and had a wild grin on her face. "Interesting." Byakuran and Renka. Byakuran and Renka watched as the barrier started to break. Renka was absolutely stunned by this, while Byakuran was more or less surprised. "Captain, what was?" Renka started, but then she felt an all too familiar pressure coming from the object. She looked to the sky and shuddered at the energy of the male soul reaper she had thought died. Byakuran felt it too, and she didn't like what it meant now. Soifan. Soifan was in her barrack watching her stealth force train when she saw the barrier being penetrated. She was stunned by what she seeing and gritted her teeth when the object broke through. Retsu Anahana. Retsu watched on as the barrier broke completely and 4 beams spread out in 4 different areas. Genmei Shijakuni Yamamoto. The head captain watched on in surprise as the barrier that had never been destroyed throughout history was, well, destroyed. She was an old woman with long gray hair that was tied up behind her in purple fabric. She may be old, but she still has one of the most muscular physiques in all of Seoul society. "This cannot be good," she said to herself. But Ichigo. Ichigo crashed down in a street hard, causing a crater to form. He groaned a little and sat up slowly. Ichigo had no idea why that happened earlier. His energy was solid all throughout the dome, and since it was just him, there's no way any of the girls could have caused this. "Think later," Zangetsu said to him in an alert tone. "We've got company." Ichigo quickly stood up and prepared himself for a battle when he noticed that there were 2 women standing in front of him. One was a bald woman who held her zanpakuto and scabbard in her hand, while the other had some weird-looking decorations on her face. The weird one was apprehensive about showing any of her skin to people, while the bald one was more than happy to flaunt around with her cleavage showing her impressive bust. Ichigo stared at her wide-eyed for a brief moment when he saw one of her nipples slide out of her shihakusho. They both looked at him stunned at just who they were seeing. A male soul in the Soul Society. "Who are you?" The bald one stammered as she stared. "Ichigo Kurosaki." He answered them after regaining his composure. "And you two are?" Both women blinked a few times before realizing the situation. He was an intruder and he had to be brought in. Yumichika Asagawa. The weird one answered first, hesitantly. Ikuko Madaram. She started as she saw that he had a massive cleaver on his back and smiled. Yumichika, stay out of this one. I want to fight him all by myself. Yumichika smirked at her friend when she saw that battle-hungry look on her face. She nodded and stepped back as Ikuko drew her blade and got into stance. Ichigo didn't waste any time in pulling out his large weapon and getting ready. Ikuko rushed him, expecting an easy battle, but she was surprised when he blocked her fairly easily. Ichigo pushed her back and watched as she landed on the tiles of one of the walls. She jumped down and went for a combo of strikes. Ichigo blocked her for the most part. He had become so accustomed to fighting Zangetsu's sporadic and fast movements that he thought Ikuko was just plain slow. Ikuko was starting to get frustrated and it was showing in her movements. Her strikes had become faster and more ferocious. Ichigo could tell that he should try ending this quickly before more show up, so he finally started going on the offensive. He forced his way to her and caused her to start blocking. Yumichika looked on in shock as Ikuko was starting to get beat. Time to end this. Ichigo said to himself. He leapt into the air and went for a slash, but was surprised when Ikuko pressed her blade and scabbard together. Extend, Hazukimaru. Her sword changed to a spear and she thrust it at Ichigo. Ichigo brought Zangetsu up to deflect her, but he noticed her grin too late. Her spear hit the edge of his cleaver and extended into a 3-section staff. The blade part curved around Ichigo's Zanpakuto and gives him a shallow cut on his cheek. Ichigo jumps back and lands on the ground. Good reflexes. Ikuko said to him with that grin growing wider. Now it's really time to have some fun. She rushed over to him and went for another thrust. She was even more ferocious than before with her attacks. Ichigo was starting to get a little annoyed by how she would constantly make her staff break apart whenever he blocked it. Have you noticed it, Ichigo? Zangetsu asked him. Yep. Then end this bitch already. I'm getting sick of her swinging those hooters of hers at you. Zangetsu finished with a disgusted tone in her voice. Ichigo smirked and caught Ikuko's attention all too late. She went for another thrust, only this time Ichigo caught her spear with his free hand. Ikuko was caught off guard, especially when Ichigo slashed her from her hip to her shoulder. He let go of her staff and watched her stumble backwards a few feet. You really shouldn't rely too heavily on that 3-section staff trick too much. Ichigo said to her. I'm not done yet. Ikuko strained to say to him. Her body may have been screaming at her in pain to submit, but her will is what kept her standing. I refuse to lose to you. She rushed over to him with her spear. Ichigo could tell that his strike messed her up pretty badly, since she was slower than before. He didn't want to hurt her any more than he already has. A gentleman like no other, but he knew she would just keep getting back up. So he made a decision right then and there. When she got closer, Ichigo slashed at her other shoulder, causing her shihakusho to tatter off of her upper body. Ikuko fell to the ground just when that happened. Ikuko? Yumichika yelled out as she ran over to her downed friend and comrade. Ichigo took this opportunity to leave before he had to face off against her and the incoming Soul Reapers not too far off. He flashed away and soon enough found himself down another street. He decided not use flash step anymore since they'll be able to track him with that, so he simply started to run around. He avoided several women along his way and stuck to the shadows. Luckily for him, Zangetsu had been suppressing his spirit energy ever since he defeated Ikuko. This isn't really getting me anywhere. Ichigo started after peeking his head out of an alleyway. How the hell am I supposed to find Rukia and the others if I don't even know my way around her? Suddenly the entire Sarate was on high alert and Ichigo had a pretty good idea of why that was. Captains meeting 10 minutes after Ichigo defeated Ikuko. All the captains stood in their respective areas within the room. Beforehand, when some of the squad 6 members showed up to the site, Yumichika had explained that one of the invaders was a male soul. Everyone was now both shocked and on edge at this news now. The head captain made her way inside and sat in her chair in front of her fellow captains. She banged her cane down and began this important meeting. This is a general order. She started in a commanding voice. We have been invaded by a total of 6 Ryoka, and as you all aware of, one of them is a male. There was a silence in the room as everyone aside from Byakuran looked on in shock at the head captain's words. You don't really believe that this accusation is true, do you, head captain? Mayuri started getting everyone's attention. From what we were told by Kichiki over here, that boy was taken care of back in the world of the living. I've felt his power before, Kuretsuchi. Byakuran started getting everyone's attention. It's not something I'm going to forget anytime soon. So, you're basically saying that he's very strong, right, Kichiki? Kenpachi asked her with a manic grin on her face. Byakuran didn't bother answering the savage of a captain, but that only made Kenpachi really want to find him now. Not only that, but Yumichika told her that he beat Ikuko easily and it felt as if he was holding back substantially. Without wasting any more time, Kenpachi went for the door. "Zaraki!" Soifan yelled out to her. "Where do you think you're going during a captain's meeting?" "I'm gonna find this guy, fight him, beat him, maybe him if he's still breathing, then drag his ass here so you can learn what mean to be a woman for once." Kenpachi said as she opened up the door and walked through it, leaving Soifan seething. As Kenpachi made her way outside, she kept thinking about how she should order that now. Should I fight him after I find him then him, or him after I find then fight him? Odd, I'll figure it out later. Ichigo, an hour later. Back with Ichigo, he had made many twists and turns, but had eventually decided on heading to the massive tower in the center of this place. With a little help from Zangetsu, he was able to navigate through the place without being seen. Earlier on he overheard that there was a general order to capture the male Soul Reaper that has invaded the Sirte. He saw how every woman here was now frantically searching in hopes to just get a glimpse of him, and that in turn meant he had to be even more cautious than before. Almost there. Ichigo said to himself as he reached a flight of stairs that led up. That was when he felt a familiar spirit energy coming from the bottom of those stairs. He looked closely through the fog and saw the red-headed Soul Reaper from before. Rinka Abarai. "So, you actually somehow still lived." She started as she drew her blade and started walking toward him. "Well, I'm real hard to kill, so yeah, I guess I did," Ichigo said as he went over to her, cleaver drawn. The two clashed and Renka could immediately feel the difference in how he was before and how he is now. He forced her back and pressed her into a wall. "Tell me where Rukia is right now, Renka," Ichigo demanded from her. She smirked. "You don't honestly think you can save her now, do you?" she asked as she was now forcing him back. "Get real." She swatted him off of her and swiped her hand along her blade. She flung her extended blade at Ichigo, and he blocked it for a brief moment before fully dropping to the ground. "Don't you get it?" she started. "It's because of you that she's about to be executed. It's because of you that she has to die. Damn you." She flung her blade again, but Ichigo dodged it this time. Since he was faster now, her movements were completely readable to him this time. "If only you didn't exist," she continued as she kept her onslaught going. "If you didn't, then we wouldn't even be in this mess right now." She leapt into the air and brought her blade down on his cleaver. Dust, spiritual pressure flared up from her strike as the both of them were now in a stalemate. "If you didn't exist, then I wouldn't have to watch my closest friend die," she said in a low tone that had an underlying tone of anger. "If that's the case," Ichigo started, getting her attention as his eyes glowed a dark color. Suddenly, it was like the pressure from before had been dialed to 11. Renka was pushed back by the sheer force of his power and remembered this feeling from their first match. She shuddered when she saw the way he was looking at her. Those eyes were just piercing through her, leaving her almost like she was being undressed from his stare. "What the hell is this?" she said to herself. "This is even worse than before. Let me tell you something about myself, Renka." Ichigo started as he slowly walked over to her. "When I somebody that is my friend or someone I come to respect and owe my own soul to, I will do everything in my power to protect them. I don't care who stands in my way of doing that, Renka, because I will always find a way. If I'm protecting someone, I won't let her die." Renka swung her blade to him only for Ichigo to block it. "If I'm defending, I won't let you hit me." He used his own strength and broke through her defenses. He raised his blade into the air and a dark energy could be seen resonating off of it. Renka was stunned by what she was seeing. "And if I'm attacking?" he started again. "I will cut you down." Renka was about to attack, but before she could do anything Ichigo had already brought his cleaver down on her. There was an explosion of black energy and Renka was pushed back by the blow. She hit some of the rubble and a large amount of blood came out of her open wound. Her Zanpakuto blade was destroyed, her tie for her hair broke and her shihakusha was torn, revealing her tattooed body. "What happened?" she asked herself as she started to fall forward. "I got beat. By him? Just how does he have so much power? Just what is he?" Before she could hit the ground, Ichigo had caught her. "I swear to you, Renka." He started in her ear, sending a warm shiver through her beat-up body. "I won't let Rukia die. He's so warm." Renka thought to herself as she let herself be wrapped in his embrace. "I just want to stay like this. This warmth, his comforting voice, his unbreakable will. I hope he can keep that promise." And with that, Renka passed out. Ichigo set her down on the ground gently and felt incoming energies on the way. He quickly made his way up the stairs before anyone could see him and found himself in some kind of large open area. There were a few structures around him that looked like abandoned buildings. He didn't pay those any mind as he saw the tower and made his way to it. As he was running though, he didn't notice that he was being watched. "So that's him," the maniac captain said with a wild grin. "I'm gonna enjoy fighting him." With that, Kenpachi released her energy causing Ichigo to stop in his tracks. He had never felt anything like this before. The pressure was incredible and had the feeling of a killer behind it, yet it also had what Ichigo could only describe was a feeling of as well. He looked around for the source when he finally laid eyes on someone sitting on one of the buildings, watching him. Ichigo stared at her wide-eyed as he could see the big tooth grin from her. "Don't get intimidated, Ichigo," Zangetsu said to him. "Remember, you said you'd go through anyone, well that also means captains. I got your back, Ichigo. Always." But those words of reassurance, Ichigo shook his head to focus and released his own energy. It was on par with hers at the moment until he drew his cleaver. That was when his far surpassed hers. Denpachi's grin grew wider and she jumped down with her sword drawn already. She landed not too far away from him and stood tall. "Okay," Ichigo said to himself as he saw just how big this woman was in every aspect of the word. "And just who exactly are you anyway?" "The name's Kenpachi Zaraki." She started as she placed her jagged blade on her shoulder and grinned at him. "And I'm here to fight you, then I'll just you somewhere." Ichigo raised an eyebrow to her and a tick mark formed on his head. First Yuruchi, then Kukaku, now this crazy looking captain. It was probably gonna get worse for him later on down the line. Not wanting to waste any time, Kenpachi rushed over to him and brought her blade down. Ichigo blocked it, but not before he formed a crater in the ground from doing so. He forced her off of him and rushed to her. They clashed, causing intense pressure to resonate off the buildings. Kenpachi forced him off of her this time and went for a stab. Ichigo dodged it, but his shihakusho was torn in the process, revealing his toned body to the woman. She licked her at the sight of his now open shihakusho. "Strong, male, and sexy," she said within her voice. "I'm gonna rock your world when I beat you." Ichigo could feel Zangetsu's instinct start to take over and he retorted back with a grin of his own. "Heh. Even if you are somehow able to beat me, I highly doubt you could handle me in bed." Denpachi was now starting to get hot and bothered now. This time, Ichigo rushed over to her and she had to go on the defensive. She could tell that he was fighting differently now as his strikes were faster and more sporadic than before. He had even thrown his cleaver at her a few times and cut her along the shoulder. "Now this isn't fun," Kenpachi yelled out as she ran towards him. The two had started to land several blows on each other now. Kenpachi had suffered several cuts and slashes to her body, but Ichigo was stabbed in the chest by a lucky shot as he called it. He was bleeding, which was normal for any blow like that, but what surprised Kenpachi was the fact that he was ignoring it completely. After a few more clashes, Ichigo managed to force her back with a deep cut along her chest. This cut the bandages holding her breast in and they popped out in all their glory. "Now this is the most fun I've had in such a long time," Kenpachi said as she looked up to the sky and panted heavily. Ichigo was starting to regain himself and he started feeling the blood loss coming at him quickly. He dropped to one knee as he was losing blood by the handful. "With you," Kenpachi started as she went for her eye patch. "I can go at full strength." She pulled it off and a massive yellow beam of energy flew into the air. It surrounded her and her eyes glowed a yellow color. "Don't tell me you're done, Ichigo," she started. "This is just a more fun version of foreplay in my eyes." "Damn," Ichigo said to himself as he was starting to fade from his wound. "Alright, then Ichigo," Zangetsu said to him. "I think it's time to end this fight. Stand up and pour all of your energy into this one last attack. I'll worry about the wound, now go." Her voice was commanding and Ichigo could feel his blood stop for now. He stood up and held his blade in front of him, calling on his remaining power for one last attack. While Kenpachi had yellow energy with skulls around her, Ichigo's was black with a red mask in the center of it. Kenpachi was impressed by this and wanted to fight him even more after this. "You ready, Ichigo?" Kenpachi yelled to him. "Ready when you are, Kenpachi," Ichigo answered her. The two rushed at one another and clashed one last time. As they did, a massive torrent of black and yellow energy fired into the sky for everyone in the Sirte to see and feel. It stayed that way for several seconds until it finally died down. In the center of it all were the two individuals responsible for the destruction and energy fired into the air. Kenpachi had her Zanpakuto through Ichigo's stomach, while Ichigo had his cleaver lodged deep into her shoulder. He too stared each other down for a few more seconds until the both of them fell to the ground. As they laid there, they got a very good look at one another and Kenpachi grinned weakly at him. This means you win, Ichigo," she said to him before she lost consciousness. Ichigo quickly followed suit afterwards and let his wounds and blood loss overtake him. "Ichigo," a familiar voice shouted out as she flashed next to him. The voice belonged to none other than Yuruchi. She knelt down to him and looked to be panicking. "Don't worry, Ichigo. I'll save you," she said frantically before picking both him and his Zanpakuto up and flashing away. Just as Yuruchi left, a small girl with pink hair landed near the downed captain. She looked a little worried but knew Kenpachi would be okay. Kenpachi slowly opened up one of her eyes and saw her adoptive daughter staring down at her. She grinned weakly again and said, I'm really gonna look forward to fighting him again. Han was pacing in Ichigo's body in the Urahara shop. She had been waiting for hours ever since Kisuke told her to come to shop for a surprise. She was clearly a little anxious and nervous about what Kisuke had invited her for, and it showed in her posture and movements. Han waited and waited until her anxiety got the better of her. She walked over to the door to Kisuke's lab and knocked hard. After not getting a response the first time, she knocked again even. "Come on Kisuke," Khan said to herself. "I'm freaking out over here." Before Khan could try and knock again, the door opened and Kisuke stood there with a big toothed grin on her face. She looked at Khan and she brought her fan out. "Well Khan," she started in her usual jovial tone. "Come on in and see exactly what I've made for you." Khan sighed and went in, hoping that this waiting was worth it. She stepped inside a dark room that had only a few dim lights in the corners and a table in the center of it. Kisuke was standing there with her back to Khan, but turned around to smile at the mod soul. She held her fan up to her face and moved out of the way to show Khan her own body. It was tan-skinned girl that looked like she could be in Ichigo's school. He had long curly brown hair that went to her mid-back and had a very curvy figure. Her breasts seemed to rival Orihim's in size, and her were just as, if not more, wide than Yoruichi's. She was also as well. "Whoa," Khan said as she approached the body. "This is me?" she asked a shopkeeper who was smiling deviously at her reaction. "Yes it is," she answered with her jovial tone. "It took some time, but I was finally able to make a body that can not only hold your soul, but also grant you the ability to fight against multiple hollows without so much as breaking a sweat." She raised the body up so it was now sitting up. "I was even able to enhance your speed, strength and agility while you're in this body. I even managed to have it where you can simply enter the body by exchanging your soul candy to her from Ichigo's body." Khan looked at her confused. "How do I do that?" Kisuke's devious smile was visible to Khan now, and she could tell it wasn't going to be a good thing. "Simple." Kisuke started as she clutched the body and perked them to form a kissing motion. Through lip contact. Khan blushed lightly at this and didn't know what to say. It would be very embarrassing to just kiss a fake body of herself, but then the thought of helping Ichigo came into her mind. She wanted to come with to rescue Rukia alongside him badly, but with her form, she wouldn't be much help to him. Truth be told, while she did want to save Rukia, Khan mainly just wanted to be more to Ichigo than just someone to watch his body. Even Orihim was helpful to him, and she felt that that was just sad. With her new determination to help Ichigo, she grabbed the head with both hands and planted a long deep kiss on its dot. Kisuke stepped back in surprise. She may have teased Khan, but she never would have expected her to go at it like that. It sort of made the shopkeeper a little bit jealous. Even though she was in Ichigo's body and kissing her new one, it still looked like Ichigo planting those luscious on her. She gulped and blushed lightly at the sight as Khan transferred herself into her new body. When that happened, Ichigo's body fell to the ground and Khan opened her blue eyes. When she saw that she was now staring at the ceiling now, she sat up quickly and felt her new body up. It felt real just like when she would be inside of Ichigo, only she felt lighter for some strange reason. She looked over to Kisuke and smiled. "Thank you Kisuke," she said. "At least now I won't be a burden to anyone." "You mean Ichigo don't you?" Kisuke asked her with a devious grin. It caught Khan completely off guard as she frantically shouted out. "Shut up." "Well be that as it may." The shopkeeper started after laughing a little. "You're gonna have to stay here for a while and train that sexy body before you can do anything." Khan looked over to her with a look of determination and nodded to her. Sirte. After what happened between Ichigo and Kenpachi, the whole Sirte was now on edge. Everyone knew of Kenpachi's intense and killer energy, but the fact that one of the Ryoka matched and probably even surpassed her power was enough to make everyone nervous. This male Soul Reaper was now the talk of the entire Sirte. Women started to search for him with even more intensity than before, and it was far too easy for 4 certain women to slip past everyone unnoticed. Orihim and Renji had landed together close to a storage room. They decided to blend in with everyone and were slowly but surely making their way to where they thought Rukia was. When they saw and felt Ichigo's incredible power beam high into the air along with someone else, they were both worried and in awe. Tad and Uryu had taken a less subtle approach to finding Rukia. They had fought through many Soul Reapers to get to a gate, only to be met by a captain with a straw hat on. At first she wanted to simply sit the two down and have a few drinks, but that stopped when the beam of energy and the pressure dropped on them. The 3 looked on in pure amazement at the massive beam of energy, and the 2 teams recognized that energy. The other captains felt and saw the energy as well, and were also very shocked by the intensity of it. As everyone at the moment watched the beam disperse and the pressure lighten, one thought popped into all of their thoughts. I really need to find this male Soul Reaper. Since AQ. Rukia may have been in an area where spirit energy can't get into, but even she was able to subtly feel the incredible power that shined high in the Sirte not too long ago. She recognized one of the energies as Captain Kenpachi Zaraki of Squad 11, but the other was vastly different. What the hell was that? She asked no one in particular as she continued to look onto where the black beam was fired from. Squad 4 barracks. There were several dozen new patients in the Squad 4 medical barracks now. Most, if not all, were reported to be sent here by two of the Ryoka. The descriptions classified the two as a tall woman with a strange right arm and a Quincy. Out of the dozens there though, only two were there because of someone else. Renka and Ikuko were in a separate room from the others and conversed with each other after the beam fired into the air. Ikuko recognized her captain's spirit energy all too well, but both she and Renka instantly recognized the other energy. Ichigo. Renka said as she stared out the window. Damn, he's powerful. Ikuko started, getting Renka's attention. When I fought him I could tell that he was holding back, but I guess with the captain he actually went full force. If that's the case, Renka started as she remembered the last two times she faced him, specifically when he let his spirit energy unleash on her. Then that means he is something else entirely. Before Ikuko could ask what she meant, the door to their shared room flung open, and a swarm of questioning women wanted to know every detail on this male Soul Reaper. Secret labs. Sarako and Gina felt that intense pressure earlier and Sarako was immediately interested in this male Soul Reaper now. She was sitting at her console and trying to get some kind of footage or anything she could find on what he at least looked like. Unfortunately for her she had nothing. Damn it. Sarako muttered to herself. Let me guess. Gina started in her usual tone. Can't find anything on him. Sarako glared at Gina and the fox-like woman burst into laughter. I hate you sometimes, Gina. But Yuruchi. It took the goddess of Flash a little bit of time to remember just exactly where the old hideout she and Kisuke used to go to, but she found it nonetheless. She placed Ichigo down on a mat and pillow as carefully as possible before going to his bloody chest and stomach. She was visibly worried and frantically grabbed the medical supplies on hand. When she went to bandage him up, she noticed that there were no wounds. What the hell? She said to herself as she saw how his once open wound had cauterized on its own. It was bubbling slowly though, almost like it was healing him. That was when Yuruchi realized. High-speed regeneration. Something like that. A distorted voice said from behind the Soul Reaper. Yuruchi turned around fast and saw that it was a pale-skinned woman with long black hair and black eyes with yellower eyes sitting behind her. Yuruchi stuttered for a bit, not knowing who this was or how they got here. Before you ask any stupid questions. The woman started. My name is Zanjetsu, and I was the one who helped Ichigo. The name struck Yuruchi like ice. She remembered Ichigo say his Zanpakuto's name was Zanjetsu, but she had no idea that his spirit looked like this. What do you mean you helped him? Yuruchi finally managed to ask her. She was hesitant, but she allowed the spirit to sit next to her. Easy. I just don't want him to get hurt and this happens. Zanjetsu pointed towards the healing wound on his stomach. It won't heal as fast, but when it finishes he'll be 100%. Yuruchi sighed in relief at those words and rested on her arms. She looked at him with her usual devious grin now. Well, since that'll be a while, I might as well get my fill of seeing him in all his glory now. Zanjetsu shook her head and glared at the woman next to her. Two things. 1, while he's healing up, you are not getting a look at his goods. And 2, since I'm pretty sure everyone's gonna want a piece of this strawberry, I guess I might as well get rid of that pesky barrier of his now. Yuruchi tilted her head in confusion to the spirit. Barrier? Yeah, that British barrier I put up years ago. You honestly think he doesn't just go for any of you because he's just naturally a prude, right? Zanjetsu said with a devious grin of her own. She looked at Yuruchi who had her jaw dropped. With that barrier gone, Ichigo would gladly welcome any girl into the sack with him. And that might start with you, Yuruchi, if you help me. The dirty thoughts of Ichigo ravishing her body went through Yuruchi's mind until she registered that last part. Help you with what? Zanjetsu smiled to her and answered. I'm gonna need your help training Ichigo to achieve Bankai in 3 days. Back in Karakura town, Kon had been training her new body ever since she got into it. So far she was very proficient at hand-to-hand combat, speed, and a technique that she can use when she gathers Ryatsu in her legs. Kon was now a force to be reckoned with, and this made her proud. She easily rivaled that of a captain, but knew that fighting one would be a bad idea. Now she can finally help Ichigo in more ways than one. Kon had just finished training in the underground training area under the shop and was waiting patiently for Kisuke. It was nearly time to go to the Soul Society now to help the others out. She sat on a rock wearing tight black jeans and a white tank top that hugged her body tightly. She also had her brown hair tied up in a ponytail similar to how Yuruchi has her hair. After a few minutes of waiting, Kisuke finally came to her from behind a large mountain. She pulled off her bucket hat and wiped the sweat off her forehead. Ryu. The shopkeeper said in an over-exaggerated way as she approached Kon. Recalibrating that thing so you'd land somewhere inside the Sirte was really super tough on me. An could tell that Kisuke was both serious about that, but also just trying to lighten the situation. She stood off the rock and stretched herself out before asking the obvious. So Kisuke, since I won't be inside Ichigo's body all that much anymore, what exactly is gonna happen to it? Kisuke grinned deviously before answering. Simple. I put another mod soul in him, you silly girl. She pulled out another mod soul pill, but this one was blue instead of green. This is a little something I've cooked up to serve as a potential replacement for you, Kon, since you wanted your own body. It will now inhabit this plushie whenever Ichigo gets back. Kisuke reached into the sleeve of her coat and pulled out a Black Panther plushie with wide eyes. This is my replacement, huh? Kon asked her. Yes, she is. Kisuke said as she placed the blue pill inside the plushie. After a few seconds, the plushie started to move around a bit. Kon, meet Sen. Sen looked up to Kon and smiled. Hey there. Nice to meet ya, she said in an enthusiastic voice. Nice to meet you too, Kon said to her. So I might as well go through some things that you're not allowed to do with Ichigo's body. Senator Sen nodded to her to continue. No fondling his body. No sex with any other spiritually aware being that asks, or any humans for that matter. Don't do anything illegal at all. And most importantly, don't put his family in any danger at all. Understand? You got it, boss girl, Sen said as she raised a soft paw to Kon. Kon nodded to her, then looked to Kisuke. Kisuke motioned her over, and the three went to the makeshift Sinkamen. Kon stood in front of it and waited as Kisuke started it up on her end. Alright, Kon. Kisuke started. Just like with the others, when you get inside the precipice world, run as fast as you can toward wherever the light is, and you'll be inside the Sirte. When that happens, you'll either already be confronted by oncoming Soul Reapers, or have a slight chance of getting there before they do. Either way, when you get there, look for the others and help in any way you can. Kon nodded to her and waited for Kisuke to open the portal. It took the shopkeeper a short time to do so, and Kon had already flashed in the second it happened. Kisuke quickly closed the portal and sighed in relief. Well, now that the hardest part is over, all that's left is to hope they succeed. In the precipice world, Kon was moving at full speed down the long hall-like area, leaving the cleaner in the dust and headed toward the light. She went through it and found herself falling down from high in the air, but from which she could see briefly she was inside. Damn it, Kisuke, she yelled out as she fell and hit the open courtyard hard. She stood up quickly and realized that she was a lot more durable than she gave herself credit for. After a quick look around, Kon noticed that she was clear and no one was around immediately. She ran away from the area quickly and started her own search for her friends, or more precisely, Ichigo. Secret underground training area. Ichigo woke up not too long ago and was met with both his Aunt Bakuto and Yuruchi staring him down. They had explained everything to him and said that he would be training here for now until he mastered Bankai. Ichigo wasted no time in getting into the training as quickly as he could. In these training grounds it was very similar to the one Kisuke had under her shop, but Yuruchi explained to him that this was the original and that one was a copy. Ichigo was battling an infinite number of his Aunt Bakuto spirit and Yuruchi as well. It was tough on him the first hour as both of them were of two different styles. Yuruchi of speed and close quarter combat, Zangetsu of sporadic sword play. The fact that there were multiple Zangetsus didn't make this any easier on him either. The whole idea to this was to build up his energy, and so he could find his Bankai blade amidst the sea of blades in the grounds. Zangetsu and Yuruchi weren't holding back or pulling any punches at all in the training process. They were going at him full force, and the fact that each blade Ichigo grabbed didn't last at all didn't help at all. Oh, come on, Ichigo, one of the Zangetsu said to him when another blade shattered in his hands and earned him a nasty cut on his shoulder. Just grabbing at any one of these blades at random will get you killed. I know Yuruchi won't do that, but I will if I keep seeing this from you, Ichigo. Yuruchi was shocked that his Aunt Bakuto spirit would openly say that she'll kill her own master. Was Zangetsu really serious, or was she just saying this to get Ichigo to fight? She couldn't tell, but this seemed to work as Ichigo rose to his feet and grabbed at another potential Bankai. Zangetsu sighed loudly and she and her other selves rushed at Ichigo. Ichigo turned and ran away from the swarm, blocking oncoming strikes from the ones that caught up to him for a brief moment before the blade broke on him. He jumped away and was met by a swift kick to the back of the neck by Yuruchi. He fell onto the ground hard and the impact kicked up dust everywhere. When it cleared, there was a large crater but no strawberry. Zangetsu looked around as did Yuruchi, and they couldn't find any sign of him. Not too far off was Ichigo hiding behind a large rock away from the group attacking him. He was not only very beat up from that attack from earlier, but now he was incredibly frustrated. How was he supposed to find his true Bankai blade in all of this if he had no idea what it would even look like? He looked around in the sea of blades and didn't know what to do. It was then that he remembered what Zangetsu said to him. He was just grabbing at random. He wasn't trying to find Zangetsu, he was just going through these blades until he found the actual one. That wasn't going to work here. He had to focus on finding the actual Bankai Zangetsu and tune out the others. But that thought now in his head, Ichigo closed his eyes and started to breathe slowly to focus. "Come on, berry boy." Yuruchi started with a devious tone that hid concern. "Hiding only makes me want to find you even more now." She may have been hiding it well, but she was very worried for Ichigo's health right now. He had been taking a lot of punishment for the past few hours now, and he would have to continue going through this for 2 extra days if he doesn't figure this out now. She jumped over to Zangetsu, who had sent her clones in all directions to find Ichigo, and asked her. "So which one is your Bankai blade anyway?" Zangetsu looked at her and shrugged. "I honestly don't know. Contrary to popular belief, I have no idea what this blade will look like, but when Ichigo finds it, I'll know." Yuruchi couldn't believe what she had just heard. Not only had Zangetsu literally just sent Ichigo out on a scavenger hunt, but both she and said spirit were tasked with nearly killing him in the process. How was this a good idea? Back with Ichigo, he had focused on finding his true Bankai blade when he felt it far in front of him. He concentrated and blocked out all the fakes from his mind to see his blade glowing a faint energy only he could see. Ichigo opened his eyes and could see his true Bankai blade far off. He stood up and started walking towards it. This didn't go unnoticed as one of the Zangetsu clones saw him and rushed down towards him. She twirled her cleaver and brought it down on the orange-haired teen. There was dust that covered the area and it caught the real Zangetsu and Yuruchi's attention. They flashed over and saw that a clone found him. "Alright." Zangetsu started as she placed her blade on her shoulder. "That's enough for today. Let's get Ichigo patched up and start first thing." And she was cut off when the dust cleared and Ichigo was holding the cleaver in his right hand. They all stared at him in shock as he wasn't even paying the clone any attention. He flung the blade along with the clone away from him and walked forward. Ichigo ignored the rest of the blades around, walking only to the real blade he needed. The clones all rushed him only to be stopped when Ichigo grabbed one of the fake blades and twisted his body to strike each and every one of them. They fell to the ground and Ichigo dropped the fake blade to proceed to the real one. Both Yuruchi and Zangetsu watched as he stopped in front of something. Because of their position they couldn't see it, but they could hear what Ichigo said next. "I found you." Back in the Sirte. Han had fought through several Soul Reapers already with little effort to it. Her new body was more than a match for any standard Reaper, and now reports of a new Ryoka had been spreading like wildfire though the Sirte. A dark-skinned girl in black jeans and a white tank top with tied-up brown hair had spread everywhere. It didn't take long until it reached Orihime and Uryu though. They had decided to disguise themselves in Soul Reaper attire to blend in and get through areas easier when they heard about this new girl that was going through everyone that was in her way. Uryu. Orihime started as she and Uryu were walking through a street along with some other Reapers. "What do you think of this, girls? The fact that she's dressed in black jeans and a tank top and is fighting off Soul Reapers must mean that she's here for some reason or another," the Quincy said to her. "This is a hypothesis, but I think this girl might also be here for Rukia." "Really? Then that means she's on our side, right?" Orihime asked her in a low tone. "Just because she's here for Rukia doesn't mean she's automatically with us, Orihime," Uryu said to her. They continued to walk as they saw their targeted area not too far ahead of them. Han had taken a break from beating up Reapers and hid in a storage shed to get some much-deserved rest. She hadn't found Ichigo's energy despite him always releasing it. She hadn't even found the others either, and it was driving her crazy. If she can't find any of them, then that just means she would have to try, or else she would have to save Rukia on her own. It wasn't long before she could hear other Soul Reapers outside the storage room conversing about her and Rukia's execution. "Did you hear from your captain too? I heard her say that since the Ryoka are here for that Kichiki girl that they're moving the execution date to tomorrow. Won't that just make the Ryoka scramble to the execution grounds though? I think that's the idea." Han was shocked by what she was hearing and couldn't think of what to do now. She had to find Ichigo and tell him, yet she had no idea where he was or any of the others for that matter. What could she do now? "If I know Ichigo, he'll probably know about this and rush over to save Rukia without a plan," Khan said to herself. She had picked that up whenever she got the chance to watch Ichigo fight Hollows. He never went in with a plan, just fight until he wins. "I guess he'll come up with something. I just have to back him up." Han decided to take a nap in the shed so she could be fully rested for the battle tomorrow. The next day. Today was the day Rukia had been dreading for some time now. She was told that she was to be executed earlier rather than the assigned date. It was less time for her to accept the mistakes she had made in the past, and it had torn her up inside. The four women stepped inside the Senseiku and fastened the ropes onto her red collar to let her outside. As she walked along the bridge, Captain Ichimaru walked up to them, causing them to stop. Well. Gina started in with her usual grin. It seems that you're about to be executed today instead of the assigned date, Rukia. It must really be such a terrible fate for you." Rukia didn't answer and instead held her head down in shame and defeat. How would her sister react if she saw her broken like this? "Well, I guess I'll see you at the Sakyoku, Rukia." Gina walked away and waved. "I look forward to it." With that, Gina left and Rukia could feel her despair rise even higher than before. Near one of the stairways leading up to the Sakyoku Hill, Chad and Genji were standing there in Soul Reaper uniforms, waiting for Uryu and Orihime. By a string of luck last night, the four met back up with each other and decided to make their way up to save Rukia. The disguises worked to a degree as not many people questioned the appearance of the four anywhere. But that being said, none of them knew where Ichigo was or if he was still okay from his previous battle that rocked the Sirte only a day and a half ago. There wasn't much time to really think about that as both Orihime and Uryu walked up to them and they all proceeded up the stairs as fast as they could to stop the execution. Back up on the hill, all the able captains and lieutenants were standing in wait as Rukia Kichiki was led to the Sakyoku. Her face was covered by a cloth, lucky for her, since she looked like an emotional wreck now. She was led to the base of the stand and breathed deeply to at least put on a strong face. The cloth was removed from her face and she looked out to see who was there. Her eyes immediately went to her older sister and she regretted looking. Byakuran didn't even so much as look up at her younger sister to show that Rukia should feel shame for bringing down the Kichiki name. "Rukia Kichiki." The head captain started as she banged her cane down. "You are charged with performing a forbidden technique upon a human in the world of the living. You are hereby sentenced to execution by the Sakyoku. Do you have any final request?" Rukia swallowed the lump in her and answered the old woman. "The Ryoka that came here to save me, could you spare them all?" Yamamoto nodded her head. "Very well then. You have my word that we will not execute them as well." Those words, though meant that they would all most likely be imprisoned, eased Rukia's heart for now. The head captain banged her cane down and the Keto Corporation members started the Sakyoku. Rukia's bonds were disintegrated as she was lifted into the air by the block-like objects. She was raised near the top of the stand and could only watch as the flames started to take shape in the form of a large firebird. Rukia took deep breaths and started to try and find some type of solace as she was about to be executed. None came to mind. A regret she remembered then, and there was the fact that she never got to see Ichigo one last time. Down below on the stairs, the four were frantically running up the stairs when they saw the fire in all its magnificence. They didn't know what to think of it and the pressure coming from the fire wasn't helping. "Guys!" A familiar voice yelled out from behind them. They all turned and saw the girl that was being talked about yesterday. They readied themselves for a fight but stopped when she talked again. "Guys, it's me, Khan. I just got a new body, chill." The three calmed down and looked at Khan in amazement. Genji was confused but knew that there were greater things at stake right now. "Can we keep going now? Your friend is about to get killed, you know." They all nodded and continued to run up to save Rukia. The Sakyoku floated there for several seconds, watching Rukia intently as its flames continued to engulf its base. She was scared. The Sakyoku spread its massive wings and reared back to start its charge. Rukia closed her eyes and tried to find peace in her last few precious seconds as the Sakyoku charged at her. The flames came closer and closer until they were nearly all over her, but then something happened suddenly. The now five made their way up to the top just in time to see the Sakyoku charge forward to Rukia on the stand. There was nothing that they could do at this point except watch as their friend is executed in front of them by the massive firebird. Suddenly though, the bird just stopped in mid-flight. Everyone was shocked that a power of 1,000 Zanpakuto just stopped abruptly and with no explanation at all to it. Rukia noticed that she was very much still alive and slowly opened her eyes. When she did, she saw a cloak flying around with the wind and someone standing in front of her holding the Sakyoku back. She went wide-eyed when she saw that it was Ichigo dressed in bandages under his normal Soul Reaper clothes. He had on a cloak tied around his neck and held his cleaver behind his back to stop the Sakyoku in its tracks. He looked at her with a grin on his face that showed just how simple this incredible feat was to him. "Ichigo." Rukia stuttered as she was at a loss for words. On the ground, everyone could barely make out who was stopping the Sakyoku, but they were very sure that it had to be this male Soul Reaper. There were stunned looks on everyone's faces though, as this male had stopped the Sakyoku with one singular blade. The five were among those stunned by what Ichigo had just done. "Yo, Rukia," Ichigo said to her as he held his place easily. Rukia quickly registered everything and could finally speak her mind now. "You idiot," she yelled out, surprising the teen. "I told you not to follow me, you idiot. I told you to live your own life before I showed up in it. Why would you come here to save me?" Ichigo smiled at her after she asked that question, causing her to blush. "Simple," he started. "Because you're my friend Rukia and I will always help my friends, no matter what the odds." "Ichigo," Rukia said as tears started to form in her eyes. The moment was ruined when the Sakyoku started to back away, causing Ichigo to stumble a bit. He turned around and saw that the Firebird had backed away for another attack. Oh? He started with a grin on his face. So you want to try again, eh? Alright. Let's go. Wait, Ichigo. Rukia yelled out as Ichigo rushed over to the bird. Both Ichigo and the Sakyoku charged one another and were on a head-on collision that every captain and lieutenant thought was suicide. Even Sarako, Gina and Kanem thought it was suicide to attack the Sakyoku. That's why it wasn't an absolute shock when Ichigo was swallowed whole by the Firebird. The Sakyoku floated there for a few seconds before screeching loudly into the air. Everyone watched in confusion as the flames started to become dim on the large creature and was replaced by a growing black energy. The black energy started at the belly of the beast and spread all the way throughout the rest of the bird until it reached the head. When that happened, the Sakyoku screeched one last time before imploding in on itself. When that happened, Ichigo was standing there, bandages and cloak on fire with his Zanpakuto accessing the same flames from the Sakyoku. He had his head down as everyone had no idea what just happened. Ichigo raised his head and took a deep breath. Everyone was on pins and needles at what he was going to do now. Then, without any warning at all, Ichigo swung his cleaver into the air and the Sakyoku came flying out of it, covering the entire area until it dissipated. Ichigo started as he brushed the flames off of himself. That's gonna be a very useful technique in the future. Now that the flames were out and there was no darkness from the smoke of the Sakyoku, all of the captains and lieutenants could see Ichigo in full now. There were many stunned looks from what he just did earlier, but those paled in comparison to what their reactions were to seeing him for the first time. They all stared at him intensely, especially after he brushed the flames off and the bandages around him started to rip off, showing his incredibly toned abs and chest. Ichigo noticed the stares and smirked. Before anyone could do or say anything, Ichigo jumped backwards and landed on the stand. Since everyone's staring at me so hard. He started as he twirled his cleaver above his head. They all watched as his blade resonated that same black energy that destroyed the Sakyoku. He brought his blade back to himself and held in a downward motion. Then watch this. He stabbed his blade into the stand and the black energy overtook the entire stand. Everyone watched in stunned silence as the stand exploded right in front of them all. When the dust cleared, Ichigo held Rukia under his arm next to his toned body and had his blade on his shoulder. She blushed heavily at the close proximity and looked away from him. I'll say this once, Rukia. Ichigo started, getting her attention. I've come here to save you because you're my friend and helped save my family, so stop arguing and let me do that. Alright. She was at a loss for words but smiled nonetheless and looked down. I won't thank you, you idiot. Ichigo smiled at and knew that that was all he needed to hear from her. Thanks for watching this video. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe and comment down below and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support and follow the StringDman for writing that awesome fanfic and also make sure to comment on this story link in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.